once you lose the weight, our bodies fight back. I don't know, it's an evolutionary thing. They fight back with increases in appetite, whether it's hunger, cravings, and people talk about this food noise of just thinking about food all the time. So when people lose that weight, they're like, I'm doing great. I know what to do. Those drivers of appetite signals in their brain start going, getting higher and higher and higher. And especially couple that with an environment that's got food that you want to eat that's around you. It's almost like you can't stop yourself. And people like, no, they just have to have self-discipline. And it's like when the biology signals are that strong and it's right in front of you, it's really hard to stop. And especially when
it's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk.
All right, guys, we're back with another episode of Table Talk. Today, my guest is Dr. Spencer Nadolsky.
Nadolsky.
I told you, board. So I'm going to kind of go through your credentials real quick here. Board certified family medicine physician specializing in obesity and
lipidology. Lipid medicine, yeah.
Lipid medicine, right? Certain words I always kind of
it's a mouthful.
Swollen tongue, B syndrome, I suppose. Former Division I wrestler, known for a practical science-based approach to weight loss, including fitness and metabolic health.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's about right.
An author, right? You have one book that was 2016.
Yeah, I had another book. It actually went through an actual publisher, but they actually never put it out on bookshelves. It was a weird thing. Anyway, that was a diabetes book, but whatever.
Then the host of Docs Who Lift podcast.
Yep.
And a husband and father of three.
Yeah.
Look at that. All right. So now, did I leave anything out?
No, that's pretty good.
Yeah. So I got some questions here from our crew members.
Yeah.
So our crew members are, private Discord, YouTube members that without them, we probably wouldn't have the podcast. So I'm going to launch out with a couple questions from them. Then I have a couple questions. Then I got a statement. Then we'll kind of get into the whole thing. Right. So the first question is, and basically what he's asking is, per his understanding, we're born with a certain number of fat cells, right? And with those fat cells, they're influenced by ghrelin. There's another one of those, and leptin.
Yep.
Right. Basically, I think what he's asking here is if liposuction is done, does that have any effect on hormone response? It's kind of a weird question.
Okay. So there's things called adipokines. So people thought that our fat tissue was inert. It just kind of was a vanity thing. We store it at a storage depot. But then over time we said, well, maybe fat's actually the biggest endocrine organ in our body because it's actually secreting these various hormones. So because of that, they've actually done things like, it's really the visceral fat that causes issues. So they've done these studies where they've taken out those specific fat cells around the areas, not subcutaneous, like the usual liposuction where you're like, I'm going to get a tummy tuck, kind of take that stuff out. But the stuff around our organs, that has an effect. I mean, if you just take away the subcutaneous fat, not as much of an endocrine change there, just because they're not, actually subcutaneous fat is kind of good for us, especially if you put it around the hips and butt, but it's really that stuff around our organs where the fat's not supposed to be. Taking it out may have an effect, but honestly, when we do liposuction, we have this propensity to bring it right back because we haven't changed our energy balance.
So is that part of the reason, perhaps then, visceral fat, which I guess is the correct term in that scenario, why that is in inverted commas worse? To have, because it feeds that kind of positive feedback system.
Yeah.
Whereas subcutaneous fat doesn't so much.
Yeah.
Well, what's the difference between the two? Because that was the next question that came from the crew.
Yeah. So subcutaneous fat, the stuff that we can pinch, the visceral fat or organ fat, the fat gets infiltrated into our actual organs. So where you really don't want the fat is places like your liver and your pancreas and your heart and things like that. You can even get fat into your muscles. The stuff you can pinch, though, the subcutaneous fat, that's generally good, especially when holding it more around the hips and things. And they do look different under a microscope, and they do have different endocrine properties in what they secrete. The stuff around our organs has these endocrine properties that likely are part of the cause of like insulin resistance and inflammation and that type of thing.
Would those visceral fat cells also be disrupting organ function to any degree?
Yeah, it's especially with the stuff around the pancreas and like your liver. It just so this is actually somewhat controversial, and this is what people are the researchers are looking at, is whether it's those hormones they're secreting versus the proximity of the actual fat to the organ, if that makes sense. So is it like is it the stuff they're secreting from just their signals, or is it just because it's where it is anatomically? Sure.
And are there any lifestyle factors differing from calorie surplus that would lead you to develop more of one over the other, or is it primarily genetic?
A strong genetic basis there. If you get the genetic lottery and you store fat, we all know it, like people store fat differently. You look at some people, they kind of have that apple bottom, pear shape, whereas some people have more of that apple visceral belly shape. And when they start looking at the genetics, that's really what determines. But if their lifestyle can play a role in there, obviously, if you're exercising and eating a certain way, probably plays a role, but genetics are a big part of that.
So if you're one of those pear-shaped individuals, in theory, you could maybe get away with more in terms of higher body fat percentage.
Yeah.
Well, not that that's what we're looking to facilitate.
So for example, people talk about this metabolically healthy obesity, they call it a phenotype. Basically, how come this person has they're 400 pounds and they don't have type 2 diabetes, where this other person's like 200 pounds, they don't look like they're that much overweight. Why do they have type 2 diabetes? But if you look at them, if you put them through a MRI or a DEXA scan, you'll see that person that has the lower weight, they're storing most of their fat viscerally, and they have the metabolic abnormalities with the insulin resistance or blood sugar start going up. Whereas the other person, they're storing a ton of it around their butt and thighs, and they're still storing it around their abdomen too when they get to that percentage so high. They have to. But that person that's able to store more, they're able to store more subcutaneous fat, and it's still not disrupting their metabolic health. So that's exactly what's going on there.
True. So from an ego viewpoint, are we all worried about the wrong type of fat?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like from a vanity standpoint, like nobody, I don't know. I would say there are some people, if you go on Instagram, there's some people that enjoy that kind of thicker look, even if it's a lot more fat than what we would consider as healthy. But if they don't have any metabolic abnormalities, it's kind of like, well, I don't know, as long as we're monitoring them. And although over time, what the argument is over time, even those people will transition later in life to that more metabolically unhealthy. But just in the meantime, it's healthier than if you were storing it viscerally or centrally.
All right, now the next low-hanging question, and we'll cover all these in greater detail as we keep going further. Yeah. So that's just the quick ones here is, what is obesity and how has that definition changed over time? And has the change in that definition accounted for some of the increase in the obesity rate?
Yeah. So when you look at like CDC definitions, they're using BMI right now. And on a population level, it does okay. There's a huge international consensus committee with all the different countries getting together and trying to define what obesity is, because I bet there's a lot of guys in here that have a BMI of over 30, which is technically that diagnosis level, that don't technically have that disease or obesity. They don't have excess adipose tissue. So really, it's really an excess of adipose tissue that's causing harm on that person. What people kind of want to move towards is this clinical definition where if somebody's really healthy but has more adipose tissue than you consider to be normal, maybe it's this kind of preclinical obesity. And once you start developing those abnormalities, it turns into this more clinical obesity. So obesity in general is where if you develop more adipose tissue than what would be considered normal or healthy. That would be a good definition. But what the actual cutoffs are, they use these BMI, which for people listening are probably like, BMI's crap. I got a BMI of
Well, has the normal changed over time?
Yeah, so they've kept it at that same 30 BMI for a long time. It's just that if you look at the prevalence, I mean, the CDC map just came out. It's just more and more.
So that's still comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, it's just the reason they use BMI is because it's so simple to calculate.
Yeah.
If you could walk in, you go through your doctor's office and in the doorway, there's like this scanner that just scans your whole body composition as you walk through. That would be ideal. But the reason they use BMI is because it's easy, quick, and does a decent job on a population level. There aren't too many people like you walking around. Most people that come to me that struggle with their weight aren't, linebackers.
I was, this may be correct or incorrect, I'm sure you can tell me, but I was told that originally BMI was developed primarily by like health insurance companies as a quick estimate of life expectancy as opposed to health. As in, whether someone is BMI 32 because they're obese, whatever that means, or because they're built like a linebacker, chances are their life expectancy is going to be less. Like you don't see many 300-pound 7-year-olds. Like, is there any truth to that?
So the BMI was it was a calculation made by this guy, Tate is his name. They tried to find some sort of calculation that showed body size that was that fit kind of this body fatness. So it was actually a long time ago. The reason insurance companies though use it is simply because of those population curves. What you said, like once it's like around a 25 to a 30 BMI, you get into this gray area of like, hey, there's muscular, et cetera, et cetera. But once you really get to that 35 BMI and above, it's this kind of J shape where you start going up and up and up, where the lower can be around that 25 or so BMI, and even around 30 BMI, someone could be relatively healthy and live longer periods of time. But when you start getting past that, especially 35 BMI, that's why the insurance companies use it. Ideally, I get a lot of people that, in the comments that are like, my doctor just wrote obesity on my chart and they didn't even look at me. Like I'm clearly don't have that much adipose tissue. So that's what pisses people off. So they should be assessing for muscularity. They should be doing a waist circumference, because like somebody could have a 30 BMI and have a relatively small waist circumference. And the reason they look at waist circumference is what we were talking about. It's a surrogate marker for that visceral fat storage.
And so in those scenarios, would something like waist to hip ratio, if we could get that data set, make that
it would help. It would help. It's just
trying to get that.
I think there'll be a paradigm shift. Maybe I'm just I don't know. Maybe I'm just too positive on that, because people think it's just going to get worse, and these companies don't want to pay for anything. But we'll see.
The next one would be, you were talking a little bit about some of the comments before we got started, and some of the comments are that you're basically bought off by Big Pharma.
Yeah.
And I found a quote from you that proves that's true. There was a $35 lunch in 2019 by Nova, right?
Novo Nordisk.
Novo Nordisk. So that would be.
Yeah. The first thing I have written on here is, are you a front for Big Pharma?
Yeah.
Big Pharma.
Yeah, so you need to account for this $35 lunch.
Yeah. It's so fun, because like I'm extremely you're bullish on these new GLP-1 agonists. You must make money off of each prescription. You're right. I'm like, it's actually illegal. It's a really, for some reason, it's common thought out there that like clearly doctors are getting paid for writing scripts. Like, why wouldn't they help with lifestyle, right? Like, why wouldn't they help people lift weights, exercise, and eat better? They're clearly getting paid by Big Pharma. Now, I will say, I went through med school from 2007 to 2011. I do hear stories about like all sorts of cruises and sports tickets for some of these big time prescribers. I missed that day, or maybe it's, I'm a millennial and actually just to, I've been offered by Big Pharma to like be part of their campaigns and get money and this stuff. I actually, specifically refused just because like I want to come off as like not a shill. I am kind of a shill in my own way, but I don't want it to be like, oh, this guy's getting paid, because there have been a few times where some of these big doctors were on like 60 Minutes and some of these other things. And people look them up and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars from big pharma. And it's so easy to write them off. So I want to come across as like, look, I'm just excited about the science and whatever else, and don't want that to seem like a conflict of interest. So that's my big thing. But yeah, I got once every year, every other year, I'll meet with one of the scientists at one of these places just to kind of talk shop, and they'll pay for the meal. So I'm like, $35. If I'm changing my whole attitude for $35, then like, I don't know.
That's what my ethics are up for sale.
Yeah.
So to go into your origin story, how do you go from a D1 wrestler to where you are now? Actually, go back further.
Yeah.
What brought you into wrestling in the first place?
Yeah. So my dad was the wrestling coach at the high school. Brother, who's an endocrinologist now, he's 4 years older than I was, and he was an extremely good Michigan wrestler, but he was shorter. And so like he, even as a freshman, he was a state champ in Michigan, which is pretty good. I know Ohio, we're here in Ohio. Ohio's got great wrestling too. And so I thought, well, my brother he ended up being a 4-time state finalist, 2-time state champ. He wrestled at Michigan State. I'm coming in literally after he graduates as a freshman. My dad was a wrestling coach. And I'm like, well, I'm a Nadolsky. I guess I'm going to be good too. I was okay in middle school, and I was terrible, but he was 5'2" as a freshman and ended up like 5'5" as a senior, kind of, stocky, SpongeBob looking guy, like just jack, and, mature for his age. But I was a little bit a late bloomer. I was like 5'11" or 5'10" as a freshman, thin. And I was terrible. I didn't even make varsity my first year. And that's when I was like, okay, something's got to change. I'm going to have to fill out into this body to look like my brother and be strong, like pound for pound, like he was, but at a higher weight. I'm not going to be able to, apparently my last name didn't matter. Like I went through a lot of adversity that first year, actually second. And then the second year I did start, but I went 500. I went 22 and 20 or something. Didn't even make it to state. Here's my brother was a 2-time finalist, 1-time state champ by the time he was done with his sophomore year. My puberty, I went through puberty. It's late bloomer, but my junior year, so I went from 145 my freshman year to 189 and I was a small 189 pounder. I was like 180 pounds, wrestling 189. My junior year, though, I went up to 215 pounds. And during this time, and this was funny, I was telling Dave before this, I was reading his stuff in high school on testosterone TMAG. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite articles was the accommodating resistance. Do you remember that that article? And actually, during my junior year, I made my dad, I was like, look, we got to go get these chains. We got to get chains. And when you go to all these stores, and I was looking, I was like, where do you find these chains? And they have to be heavy, big, heavy chain, heavy duty chains. I couldn't find them anywhere. We had to drive all the way from Holland, where we were in Michigan, all the way to Grand Rapids to this like random, you're not even supposed to be able to buy things from these people, but I kept calling everybody to try to find it. It was like a big truck store. And I saw them cut these chains for us. I'm like, they have to be this length. They have to weigh this much. And in my junior year, I got up to 215 pounds and I got strong. I mean, I was very strong as of high school, and I won state that year. And then the next year, I actually became all-state in football. So actually, I drove here because I was like, you know what? It's 4.5 hours away to do this podcast. I'm like, I got to meet this guy, Dave, because I want to tell him I became a state champ partly because of his stuff from
wrestling and chains.
That's cool.
It matches.
Yeah. And it was
the rattling.
Yeah. So, I got very strong and explosive. And so I really got into sports, and this is kind of the origin story because I felt like I was using. My dad was a science teacher as well, so I felt like I needed to use science and just work ethic to get to where my brother was, and he worked hard, but and it's not like he was unscientific. He was just working hard, and it felt like he could do anything. He could throw on volume and just go and go and go. I felt like I needed to use the science and work really hard to get big and strong. And that's what got me really into this concept of like using that. And I went and wrestled in college. I actually went to Michigan State to play football originally, ended up at UNC Chapel Hill and wrestled. Kind of a long story, but essentially football coach at Michigan State. He was Bobby Williams, if anybody remembers, gotten fired. I was a fullback. They brought in this other guy who did a spread offense and said I had to go play linebacker because they didn't have a fullback position anymore. The wrestling coach was like, no, come and wrestle at Michigan State. I was like, okay. Anyway, I was like, you know what? I wanted to do both. So I went to UNC to try to do both. I was like, you know what? I'm not Bo Jackson. I can't do two sports at once.
Yeah.
And I just ended up wrestling and did pretty well there. But when I went to med school, here's the thought around it. I was really into performance for myself, but something about helping other people just get into the lifestyle and just take them from having type 2 diabetes or like a really poor quality of life, just taking them into just having a fraction of the obsession that I have to just improve their life was so fulfilling to me. So I kind of pivoted from this kind of performance mindset for myself to just getting people to start lifting weights.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I'm wearing my Doc Suit Lift shirt, because it's like lifting weights is medicine. Like, just can I get you not afraid of like doing some sort of resistance training? Because they always, people are intimidated by it. So that was kind of the whole origin story, really into sports performance for myself. But then it shifted into taking that like really obsession over it to like just getting people to do something, because people just don't do anything.
Well, at that time, I mean, it's still that way today, but I don't believe it's as bad.
Yeah.
You're on a preventative side instead of a prescription side.
Ideally.
I mean, so how was that working out a decade ago?
Yeah. So
is that about a decade ago? Yeah.
So it's really funny. It's a good story around that. When I went to, I went to med school. So for anybody listening, you go to med school, it's 4 years. 2 years are in the classroom, then the second 2 years are in the clinic. They're starting to change it now, or they're getting people into the clinic earlier. It doesn't matter. It's 4 years. And then you choose your specialty, and that's residency. And residency can be anywhere from like 3 years up to like 8 or 9 years if you do like neurosurgery or something. And then you can do fellowships and specialties on top of that. So I did family medicine. It's the broadest of all medicine. It's 3 years. My first year, my advisors, they call them your attending doctors, the people that are board certified, teaching you how to become a board certified doctor. They called me a life. They said, you're kind of a zealot. And because I would sit there with patients being like, look, can I help you start lifting weights? Anything. I would go to the gym with patients. I would take them to the grocery store. And my advisors were like, you're crazy. This is my first. And I remember calling my brother all upset. I was at the gas station. I'll never forget. I called him like, I just had my first quarterly evaluation, and they said I'm like a zealot. And I was pissed, and I was like, you know what? No, I'm a good doctor. I'm trying to do what I can to help these patients. It was an indigent area, it was not an affluent area. So I was like doing anything I could to like help these patients like start doing a lifestyle. And by the end of my third year, so it was 3 years, that was my first quarterly like one of my last quarterly evaluations. That same advisor started doing push-ups and eating better. And they're like, you know what? I was wrong about you. You actually like inspired me to start doing this. And I was like, it felt very good.
Yeah.
Now, like looking at it now, it's people, I'm not against prescription. I use a lot of prescriptions to enable the lifestyle, but like just a foundation is trying to figure out how to get people to do that lifestyle. So it's very tough, especially in the current system that we're in. You only get like 5. I got out of the system personally. I couldn't stand the system. So in the normal system, you get like 5 to 10 minutes with your patient. If you're lucky, maybe 20 or 30 if you're in a more relaxed practice. But like, is that enough time to like really give that counseling and whatever to a patient? So that's my goal though.
Do you think part of the problem is, as almost with everything now in culture, people are just too polarized in that on one side you've got people who think you can solve everything with lifestyle, like we're all born the same, no one has any deficits, go out for a run and eat better and you'll be fine. And then you've got the other side where it's just westernized medicine, pill to fix everything, and no one's ever spending the time in the middle where it was actually where all the good stuff happens with just about everything, right?
Yes. No, that it's such a, and that's what gets social media though going. That's what people get popular. So I think that's why they polarize, because they start getting that more attention when you're polarizing. So when you look online, especially with these new GLP-1 medicines, it's like there are people that are just like, no, these are terrible. We should just eat in a calorie deficit. Like you said, exercise and just, it's not that hard. Just eat fewer calories. Whereas you got other people who are kind of like, no, obesity is a disease. There's nothing you can do. Everybody's got to basically be on these medicines and they can never come off. And it's like, well, that's not true either. Clearly, there are people that have been successful. Clearly, there are a lot of people that do need that help. There are some people that can come off the medicines, but that doesn't get all the clicks. If you're like, boom, in your face, like that's what gets people like riled up. So I'm trying my best. Well, you see in the comments here, the comments, people are,
oh yeah.
Although I will say that if you get people commenting one way or another, that does give more, it kind of sparks that algorithm.
Why do you think, though, in general, people have such a disdain for doctors commenting on lifestyle and health and fitness?
Yeah.
Because there does seem to be and yours is just an example of many where you will get comments like, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or you know nothing about this. But I'm like, well, what does the person saying that know for a start anyway? And why do we always assume that doctors can know nothing about lifestyle, fitness, lifting, whatever? Like, just like any of us can learn about it.
Yeah.
You know, in the same way, you may not get taught enough of it formally, right? But that doesn't mean you don't know anything about it.
Yeah. It's probably the history of it all. I mean, we have so many, I have patients that they'll literally tell me their doctor said, don't lift weights, only do cardio. Lifting weights isn't good for you, type of thing. And it's like, why would they say that? That's not even, and if you look at like, people talk about the pharma shill bought off guidelines. Actually, the guidelines will even say you should do at least 2 days a week of resistance, some form of resistance training. So even the vanilla bought off shilled guidelines even, say that. They're not really bought off, but I'm saying what they would come up with. So I think it's really that history. The doctors will be like, no squatting, it's bad for your knees. No lifting weights, it's bad for your heart. Only do aerobic training. So then you get the people that are like, oh, my doctor basically said to either they'll go like, you can only do keto, or if you're looking like back in the 90s or early 2000s, it's like, nope, you can only eat low fat. And so people have been, I think, kind of scorned from that. The other thing is there's just kind of an increased distrust in doctors now. The pandemic did a number on that, to where like just public health in general and just a lot of distrust. So it's like, what does this doctor know? I'm like, look, did I learn anything about lifting weights in medicine? No, I learned it from the likes of people like you guys, and try to continue doing that. And nutrition we did actually, in my med school, we did have what we call like a block of nutrition, and it wasn't bad at all. I made a joke the other day about, doctors only get however many hours of nutrition. And then I said, like, in quotes, from the person who got a weekend certification in nutrition, but that took only a 5 hours course. Yeah. Because you can do these online courses, you can do self-study and then take the test within hours. And there's some other really good. So then, of course, my buddies who were like, they're not dietitians, so they didn't get formal training, but they went through more rigorous, nutrition courses. I have this buddy, this Martin McDonald, who he's got a really good long, it's a pretty rigorous course. You have to take tests and everything like that. So there are some good online nutrition courses where you don't become an actual dietitian, a registered dietitian, but like it's pretty rigorous. But there are some other ones that are just like paper mills where you just can basically pay for a certification.
But it's an interesting dichotomy, right? Because I'm sure some of those people that saying that to you are probably the same people that will go on Instagram and go on I don't know, profile booty builder 999 or whatever, who's got and buy her 28-day transformation. Do you know what I mean? In those circumstances, there are people like that making a killing.
Yeah, they're doing really well
with people that have no formal training, no history, no experience, and yet then when you get someone who has been through the rigors of med school and stuff like that, all of a sudden it's like, now I don't think you know anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, social media it's a double-edged sword. I love it, but I also hate it at times. So it kind of shows our humanity as a whole, though, I think.
Do you at least get some positive stuff back that kind of evens it out?
Yeah, it's I get a ton of positive. It's really, though, some of the negative it's just so interesting. I'm like, some of these people, the restrict option on Instagram, I've restricted a ton of people, and they come back daily just to post. Just it would be it will be a post about nothing related to anything I talked about that got them restricted. And they'll just keep coming back every single day and posting something negative. So I'm always wondering, like, what is this person's life like where they like follow me to, like, it's a hate follow, and they follow me in order to just every time I post say something, and they don't even know that they're restricted. So they're yelling to the void. I can see it, but nobody else can see it.
Into the void.
And it's really funny, but I'm like, I always wonder what their life's like. I don't know. But I mostly get positive things. It's just there are enough negative ones that are like, what's going on?
They stand out.
Again, yeah, but it can actually boost the algorithm, ironically, just because it's like there's engagement. Yeah. It's really weird. I'm like, you're getting engagement.
Yeah. Which is great.
Yeah. So I'm like, okay, well, go ahead. I don't know.
Thanks for the help.
Yeah. Thanks, buddy.
Well, I think you kind of touched on something that comes from more of a perspective standpoint, that if I use a cardiologist, for example, they're seeing multiple patients per day.
Yeah.
And so if they come in, and most of the people wouldn't be compliant upon lifestyle factors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No.
So if they know 95% aren't going to be compliant, then what's the best option that we can do, or the doctor can do for that person? The statins, heart medication, so forth, because at least it's helping them to get better.
Yeah.
But to flip the perspective, if the patient was open, and communicated better, they would find that physician or doctor knows more about lifestyle than what they think they do.
Yeah.
Because they already stereotyped them as one person that doesn't know shit about anything until they open that dialogue, right? And granted, they still may run into an issue on time, where maybe the next appointment would be a little bit longer to go a little bit more into detail over the lifestyle. This has been my experience.
Yes, no, you're nailing it right now.
And because I just assume, going in, that's what the assumption is going to be, because that's 95% of the patients.
Yep.
Right. So then the opposite of what you were talking about is when you're talking the fitness people criticizing the doctors, meanwhile, they're kind of practicing without a license.
Right.
In a lot of gray areas they're in. So it's like, wait a minute, one's illegal, one's not, which is like worse.
Yeah.
And then the others, and it's to me, it's always been a perspective thing. That older physicians may not, but shit, they're going to die soon. I mean, that's how old they are. You know what I'm saying? So I'm not saying that to be bad, but I mean, they're 70 years old. So the younger generation of physicians know more than what people think they do.
Yeah, you nailed it. So we talk about this all the time on my brother and I on our Docs Who Live podcast, but basically there's a system issue here. Let's say that the doctor is extremely into the lifestyle thing. The system only allows them not to give them so much time. And like you said, if they spend more time with that patient, then the rest of their schedule could get backed up. So a lot of these doctors end up getting burnt out and just go, and also I will say, a lot of patients come in, they don't want to hear the lifestyle thing. Yeah. And like, honestly, like, I don't want to fault anybody. It's just kind of human nature. Like, don't tell me about the lifestyle. They're sick of hearing the doctors go, hey, have you ever thought about, like, I don't know, starting to exercise and maybe do some nutrition, whatever. And patients have heard it time and time again. They don't want to hear it. And the doctors get burned out of getting, hearing back that they don't want to the patient doesn't want to hear that. So then they just get in the mode of like, all right, here's your prescription for XYZ. Get the hell out of my office. And so it's really funny what you said, because I think it's good. That's a good observation of.
Well, the one question that I'll tell friends of mine that are in those situations is, if it's a medication that you don't want to take, then ask the physician, what would I have to do to not take this medication?
Great. Yeah.
Right. Because now you're opening that dialogue.
Yeah.
And more than likely it's going to come back to telling them something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
But at least it opened it up.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. One of the things that they teach us, kind of this more forward thinking way, just you ask permission. Can we talk about lifestyle? Do you want to talk about that? And if they said, yeah, I'm interested, boom. If they go, nope, I don't want to talk about it. There you go. The door's shut, but at least you asked. If you can get in the mode, if there are any doctors listening, I'm sure most of the doctors listening would do that anyway. But like, it's just such an easy thing. Now I'm like an obesity specialist. So people come to me like, no, help me lose weight. I know that I can actually talk about these things, but in like a general medicine clinic, when you're seeing somebody for a physical and you see that their blood pressure's up, their blood sugar's up, they have weight to lose, if you start wagging your finger and be like, hey, you really need to start diet and exercise, people can shut down. And so then asking permission, and it sounds like one of these like soft enabling snowflake type of things, but it's just kind of behavior change psychology stuff. It gets people going, oh, this guy actually is thoughtful and not just going to wag his finger at me. And it gets people to open up.
But I mean, in those scenarios, surely being too soft is better than being too harsh. Like, no one's going to lock up because you're too, or very few at least.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There are some patients where that coming to Jesus discussion is what got them to do it. But in general, that more, the worst thing you can do is not talk about it at all. So I think a better approach is at least asking permission. And then if you kind of notice that patients may appreciate more of that hard-nosed approach, you can go that way. It's just hard to tell. Like if you do that hard-nosed approach, they may never show up to your office again. They're like, this guy's a real piece of work.
But it would be interesting to know, sorry, go. How many of the people making those statements about doctors don't care about lifestyle?
Yeah.
Doctors saying that the patients don't want to hear it. What percentage of them actually try to engage in that conversation?
Yeah.
So how many of ask the doctors, what percentage of your patients do you try to have that conversation with? And then ask the patients, have you ever tried to open this conversation with the doctor? And I bet there's going to be a resounding no majority there probably, right?
Yeah.
So they're all stuck in this presumption standoff.
That's
where,
right.
like, I presume if I bring it up, you're going to give me, feed me the Bill of Rights because I'm not doing what I should. And the doctor's there going, well, I'm not going to bring it up because you don't want to hear
Exactly. You got it. No, I think you hit it on the head.
And how do we get around that? Just more doctors doing the right thing?
I think it's a system. The incentives aren't aligned. So like right now, the reason I got out of the system is simply, so my medical practice, I take cash only. It's not even a concierge thing where I charge insurance and you give me cash on top of that. It's called a direct pay model. It incentivizes everything because it's like, no, I take on fewer patients. I don't even mess with your insurance. And now I can just have that time to talk to you. Insurances right now, when I was in it, you have to ask about all these things. You have to check all these boxes, click all these markers. And then on top of that, if the insurance says, whatever, we don't want to pay you, you don't get paid. So then it's such a system issue to where then you have to see a bunch of, if you work for like a hospital system, you have to see 30 people a day to even get your salary. Whereas like I would see like more like 5 to 10 people a day. And then in between can text patients, if it's just an easy question. Whereas like doctors, they're seeing 30 people a day and then they're trying to answer their inbox and it's a miserable situation. So I think honestly, if I could use my Thanos, Infinity Gauntlet, whatever, and just destroy the whole system and rebuild it, I would. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but I think it's a system issue that needs to change.
Well, that's what I was going to say is that some of the barriers have been taken down, and this happened pre-2020 to where, at least in my network of care providers, if it's general practitioners, physical therapists, basically anything that's under surgery, I don't want to say best, but they are mine. So the best practitioners have moved to these private pay models for the reasons that you're talking about, but they can't do that if they suck.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to have any patients, right? But the patients also have to be able to pay, without, sometimes you can take that money and send it to the insurance and it will apply to your deductible. Yep. But that's on you, the patient to be able to do that. But that barrier then gets knocked down to open up that lifestyle as soon as that appointment goes from 10 minutes to probably half hour or an hour.
Yeah, exactly.
So then there's more dialogue for that. The unfortunate part is a lot of the people that may need that can't afford that.
I know. It's quite a dilemma.
Yeah, it is. It is. And that's the system kind of breakdown there. If you can afford it, great, and you get in faster. There's a lot of benefits to that.
Yeah.
But I would say most people who are listening to this can afford it if they look at how much they're spending on the other end.
Yeah.
So there's a long-term savings to that than trying to stay within that regular system.
I mean, just a bit like a personal take on that. With Naomi, she's got Hashimoto's disease, so thyroid, autoimmune thyroiditis or whatever. Back in the UK, obviously we had the National Health Service, which has pros and cons. It took her about 3.5 years to go from having blood work that kind of proved there was something wrong to actually getting her first prescription.
Yeah.
When we moved here, obviously the question then becomes, what am I going to do about my thyroid meds that I literally can't live without? We paid to see Serrano, which costs whatever it does, but she spent nearly 2 hours with him, put together a load of pieces of a puzzle that no other doctor had sat down and put together. He even diagnosed why she broke her back due to a vitamin E deficiency and so on and so forth. And it's like, I get that some people genuinely can't afford it, but for those who have expendable income, knowing the experience she had in that 2-hour appointment, if you came back to me and asked me, what is that appointment worth to you and your lifestyle and your long-term health, I would have said whatever. I could have given him a blank check almost, do you know what I mean? Because sitting down with someone like yourself who's so learned in one field can literally be life-changing, you know? And I think the perception needs to be that if you can afford it, you're not really paying for an hour or a 2 hour, you know, in the same way that if you hire a strength coach for a consult, that hour looks expensive, but it's what you learn from the hour that you carry on through your years of training or whatever that pays for it, right? And I think people don't look at it that way yet.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, now she's on meds and has advice that is going to carry her through for the rest of her life. And it's like, well, that appointment just paid for itself 1,000 times over as far as I'm concerned.
Can't put a price on.
And I'm sure you're making similar, you know, having similar effects with your patients, you know, if you just had that time.
Yeah. It's really about that. And some of it's just like therapeutic, like talk, like getting, like hearing a patient out. Because there's some people like, oh, this doctor didn't get to my root cause. I'm like, I know that doctor and I know they know the lifestyle stuff, but like they had like 5 to 10 minutes and then they go to some other, you know, whatever type of practitioner who they may be even a quack, but they sat down with them for like 2 hours and talked through the things that are good. Hey, when are you going to sleep? Is it good sleep? Do you wake up well? Or what are you doing during the day? What's your daily life like? Let's talk about this. And they feel like, wow, this person like cared and took care of me type of thing. So just having that time is so important.
Mm-hmm. And how do you feel about the work that you do now that you have that?
Yeah, I don't know if I could have even continued the way I was like, but it's just extremely fulfilling, and building relationships with patients is just, you know, watching them change their lifestyle and you know, like one of the patients sent me a message. It was like, I finally was able to walk around Disney World for the first time without it needing like a scooter and being in pain. So just thank you so much. And it was like, wow, that feels nice. It feels nice.
So that is life-changing for someone.
Yeah, it was cool. It was cool.
Do we have any other questions?
No, but I want to circle back to one thing before you start going down your rabbit hole. Well, it's just I'm looking forward to is you mentioned earlier about the BMI and the muscle mass and all the other kind of stuff. Something that I think still gets lost in that conversation of that is being 255 pounds, even if you are under 10% body fat, may not be the most optimal for your organs.
Right.
You know, so can you talk on that?
Yeah.
Especially as somebody gets older and older and older.
Yeah. So there are two different concepts for complications from obesity, and there's the metabolic consequences. So people know that as like insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, blood pressure, hyperlipidemia, dyslipidemia, that type of thing. But then there's actually like fat mass disease, meaning like issues from just having too much mass in general. And so that would be like osteoarthritis of the knees, of the hips, obstructive sleep apnea, and that type of thing. There are a few other things, you know, can get reflux and urinary incontinence and whatever. So the knees don't really like, imagine your like your bones, and this is a little bit too simplistic because there is some metabolic consequences of having that metabolic component for osteoarthritis. But let's say you're your bones and you're like, oh, the rest of this weight is muscle. instead of fat. So like, let's not start deteriorating. Again, simplistic because there is slight metabolic component, but like in your heart, pumping blood through your whole body, like, oh, let's not hypertrophy and things like that. It's in our blood, it's muscle, not adipose tissue. So there are some things where it's just straight up the excess weight in general, whether it's adipose or muscle, you still have risk there. Having said that, like if you get to the point, I mean, once people are over, 30, 35 BMI and it's mostly muscle, it's likely that they're using performance enhancing drugs to where those have a litany of obviously sequela consequences from. So what I would say is that like, look, it's better to have more muscle at a certain BMI than adipose. But at a certain point, and I would say it gets to be around that 30 to 35 BMI. Once you start getting into that range and higher, it's like you're probably still at a high risk of developing complications.
I remember seeing an interesting graph chart, whatever it was at university, which is basically that if you look at the whole mammalian kingdom, so all mammals, they have roughly the same amount of heartbeats in their life, whether it's an elephant down to like a field mouse. Obviously, the field mouse has a higher heart rate, but doesn't live as long. Elephant, slower, harder. So, like, almost using that same kind of idea, like if you're 255 pounds, there's only so much blood your heart can beat in a lifetime. There's only so much oxygen your body, your lungs can probably put out. So if it's constantly feeding 255 pounds of lean tissue at 8%, it's probably going to expire just that little bit sooner. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like revving your car that bit harder.
A lot of stress.
Right? It's like, the engine's going to give out a bit earlier if you're redlining it all the time, right? Even if it's not adipose tissue. I mean, you could probably make an argument feeding the muscle tissue is more stressful in some ways, right? In terms of oxygen demand, nutrient demand, maybe, perhaps. So, and it's still, as you said, weight that you have to carry on your joints, ligaments, tendons, and all that type of thing.
It's a relatively, I don't want to say really rare, but it's a relatively rare phenotype because, again, I didn't have too many people coming into my clinic looking like an NFL linebacker who was like, all right, this guy's 30 BMI, but like just stark, healthy in every regard. So, I mean, if we could do a randomized controlled trial, it'd be great. It's never going to happen because what you'd have to do is randomize them to likely performance enhancing drugs and get them to a certain, and you'd have to watch for years and years and years.
Awesome study.
It would be a cool study.
It'd be the person doing, as long as you're not to blind someone.
You get the placebo and everyone else gets tested. And what?
Yeah, I want to be in the blast group.
I mean, I have patients that are, they're on lots of drugs, but I'm like, all right, let's keep your lipids low, let's keep your blood pressure low, let's do what we can, metabolically to, at least on paper, make it look good. We can get echocardiograms if we need to make sure you're not, having any hypertrophy of your heart or anything like that. So, but at the end of the day, I think still likely a higher risk.
Well, speak on lipids a little bit more, because that's one of those areas that there's a lot of conflicting opinions on that.
Yeah. So, I don't know if you've had anybody talk about lipids in here, but most people are like, oh, cholesterol and bad cholesterol and whatever. There are these little proteins that actually carry the cholesterol. People hear about HDL is the good cholesterol. Cholesterol is cholesterol. It's really the little proteins that they're carried on that can cause the certain effects. So there's a little protein, apolipoprotein B. B is easy to remember because it's bad. Those are the little proteins that can actually get into the artery linings, and that's what the most common one is, the LDL particle. And LDL, people think of LDL cholesterol, but it's really the little particles that get into our artery linings and eventually can start that atherosclerosis cascade or plaque development. So if you look at your lipid panel, you'd have your total cholesterol. That's how kind of the doctors used to look at just the total cholesterol, but really you need to look at the breakdown. The HDL cholesterol, that kind of represents what we'd call the non-plaque forming particles, anything that's an HDL particle. Anything else is pretty much an apolipoprotein B carrying particle, so LDL particles, VLDL, IDL. And so when you get a standard lipid panel, it's really those LDL numbers that are kind of a surrogate, I would say a kind of an estimate of those LDL particles. It's not a direct measure. So when people may have heard of like Peter Attia and some of these other guys talking about, you got to check your ApoB, it's actually true. The ApoB does a better job. That's that apolipoprotein B. Those are the particles that can get into your artery lining. The thing is, though, what people are saying is like, I know somebody that had a high LDL cholesterol and ApoB, and they lived a long life. So this is where you start seeing people fight online. But like this part, isn't it just if you're metabolically healthy, can you just not have to worry about your cholesterol? No, those people still have a higher risk, but they're going to be lower risk than if they were metabolically unhealthy, meaning if they had type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. Because the particles are the things that get into your lining, but you still have to care about your actual lining and your health of your arteries. So things like smoking, high blood pressure, those things increase the likelihood of those particles getting into the lining and starting atherosclerosis. So really anybody listening, like, I don't want to go into the actual numbers, but like if you look at like I'm pretty metabolically healthy. I actually take a statin myself, a low dose statin and something called ezetimibe, because I'm like over long periods of time, we're talking decades, even if you're metabolically healthy, but you have a higher ApoB, you're at much higher risk of developing heart disease than someone who just carried a low level throughout life. So I actually personally take a little bit of a statin. People are like, I knew this guy was a big pharma shill.
Yeah.
It's generic though. I get it's super cheap. I get it from like Mark Cuban has his thing, is super cheap. So I'm not too worried about it. But over time, yes, you want to keep your lipoprotein B levels as low as possible. Whether you should take a drug or not, that's where you discuss with you have to talk with a good doctor, because otherwise some doctor just be like, all right, I'll just throw you on whatever medicine, and they won't know that.
Is that the next step for healthcare? Do you think that type of thought process, as in, if someone comes in at age 25, 30, whatever, full blood panel, a perfect world scenario perhaps,
yeah,
and we now know enough about the drugs and all the long-term effects that we can say, well, you would be a good candidate to be on a low dose of X, Y, or Z. Long-term is prevention rather than cure.
I think so. I think the next phase will be that you got to determine who's at risk, and they still can't really predict. Of like, they look at these genetic markers of like, all right, there's a higher risk of genetic propensity for heart disease in this person, but even when they do that, there's a lot of people that still don't develop heart disease despite that person having a high genetic. So there's got to be a point where we identify people early, because then there's a lot of people that they don't want to take a drug. I get it. I take it because I'm like, I don't feel it. It doesn't feel any different. It doesn't change anything for me, and it's really cheap. So I'm like, why not do it? I may never develop it anyway, but I'm like, if there's not going to be any side effects for me, then why not do it? But I think at some point we're going to have to find ways to target these people that were like, oh, if this person doesn't do it, they will develop it. And then this other person, they could run their ApoB and LDL cholesterol a little bit higher and not have to worry about it. There's a lot of people looking at imaging a coronary artery calcium score. I don't know if you two have done those types of things, but those do a really good job at predicting. But that's because they're actually looking at those who actually develop heart disease have a higher risk of having heart attack, and that seems obvious. It's so exciting. There's some, I call them CAC shills, because it's CAC is coronary artery calcium, and there's these people that are just straight up shills for these imaging tests, and they're like, but it's the best predictor. I'm like, yeah, because if people have it, they literally have heart disease. So, and you'll see that there are people with high LDL cholesterol levels and ApoB levels that have a 0 coronary artery calcium score, and so what a lot of these people will say, and if you look at the data, those people don't go on to have, even if because they don't have plaque. And then for some reason, not everybody, despite a high cholesterol, LDL, or ApoB level, develop plaque. And then when you look at their genetics, even if some people have high levels of ApoB, high genetic propensity for other things that are not cholesterol related, and some of those people don't develop plaque. So then it's kind of like, okay, so then how do we predict it? That's what they need to figure out. I'm doing it for myself simply because why not? Like there doesn't seem to be a harm from doing it, especially the lower doses. Higher doses, you get into risks of potentially myalgias, like muscle soreness and that type of thing. but low doses, doesn't seem to be a risk. But I do think that would be the future for all drugs. Ideally, this precision medicine.
So with those calcium scans you're talking about, would that kind of be akin to like using someone's necrotic foot to say you have diabetes? Be like, well, yeah, of course you do. Your folks, do you know what I mean? Like it's the horse is already bolted at this point in time. The scenario.
It's supposed to get what's called subclinical atherosclerosis. So clinical atherosclerosis, someone's having angina, they're having chest pain, and it's like they've got heart disease, and they do a catheterization. They put the dye right in the coronary arteries and see that there's kind of some stenosis, some blockages and stuff in there. This is supposed to get like to where they're not having symptoms yet, but you get it subclinically. You see it. They're not having symptoms, so it's subclinical. But they have they straight up have heart disease. For trying to think of the analogy for diabetes, it would be like, well, your hemoglobin A1C, your blood sugars are high. That's why they monitor people. Once they start going up, it's like, because then you're at risk of then developing the kidney disease and the diabetic foot ulcers and things like that. So you try to prevent it. And for heart disease, that's why you look at the lipid levels and you try to keep them low. But then again, some people run higher and live long, healthy lives. And then those are the people that people like, see, I don't need to take a medicine. It's like, yeah, but on average, if you look at the relative risk, it's a whole thing. So that's what gets really controversial about it, because people are like, well, I know people that smoke and have type 2 diabetes that don't have heart disease either. Should we smoke and have type 2 diabetes? I don't know. Yeah. Again, relatively rare in those cases, but I have seen them.
Everyone loves confirmation bias.
Yes. Yeah. We all do.
So if we go down a bit of a rabbit hole with just the obesity epidemic, whatever you call it, what, in your opinion, are the main drivers? Get away from just, obviously, it's calorie surplus, don't move enough. But in the US, say developed world, whatever, what are the main drivers that are making it so much worse here? Because I think I saw a stat the other day, which was like gym memberships, for example, have doubled, I think, since like the year 2000. Yeah. Now, we can argue all day whether people are using them. Yeah, but the point is, people have made the connection now that exercise is probably a good thing. Whether you know anything about it, it's different. And yet we're still in this. I mean, I know supposedly the rates have come down this year. Am I right?
It was probably a little bit of an artifact. I have a really smart epidemiology friend who kind of debunked that. Hopefully it's plateauing a little bit, but yeah, the cause, I mean, a lot of very smart researchers looking into these things. If I'm going to bet the farm, if I'm going to bet everything on it, bet my life on it, it's the food. Like, it's just, these foods bypass our system in our brain that's supposed to regulate our appetite. So for whatever reason, we can say it's the fiber, the palatability, all these different things that people are looking into, really smart scientists. Something about it, like, you're eating more calories because of this food. And then there's some other things in our environments that probably push us that way too. But there's something about these foods, the way they're engineered, they make us want to eat more of them. We eat more of them despite, like, if you put two like meals together, one has like minimally processed, the other one's like ultra processed. And again, that's controversial because like yogurts and other things that are whey protein, ultra processed, do something. But either way, if you in general, if you put two meals, someone will eat way more of the ultra processed, what we call junk food. Although some people don't like that term because we don't feel we all know what it means. Well, we know what it means. We can say that here in this circle. We know what junk food is. So, but yeah, you eat more of those. I mean, think about I was thinking about those kettle chips. Do you ever had kettle? Mm-hmm. They're just ridiculously good. And when you think about it, think about a boiled or baked potato with like not much salt on it. It's like, okay, I could eat this. But then you think about those kettle chips. They're crunchy, salty in the way that they're formed, and starchy, and like, you can just keep eating them. They have a lot of fat in them too. So the calories start loading up. You eat way more of those than you would of the potato. And I think this is pretty intuitive. People probably intuitively know this, but there are some really smart researchers trying to find exactly what is it. Because they've even done things where they've matched the fiber content. They'll add fiber, artificially into these things and see what the difference is. And really, it's just still people eat more calories of those ultra processed versions. And big food, I'm big pharma shill, but the big food, if we're going to talk about trying to regulate them, like, okay, you guys got to design these foods so people don't eat as much. That goes directly against what they want to do. So something has to give in terms of like, how do we change it back to what our environment and food environment was decades ago? I have no idea. Again, Thanos, Thanos snapped. How do you switch it back? I'm not sure there was a way to go back. So I'm more of on the side of like, well, I guess we're going to have to figure out technology to combat it. I don't know. I don't have the best answers, but I think about it a lot.
Because you obviously came back from the UK and Europe recently.
Yeah.
One of the statements you said to me is we're being poisoned.
Yeah.
So what made you say
what's
that?
different? Tell me what's different.
I got to be having some distance now and to think about it, a little bit more clear. And to be completely transparent, I also wasn't working more than 15 minutes over 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So there's a decrease in stress.
Okay.
So there's that factor, but the food tasted way better.
Where were you? Because London, I've been to London.
I went to London, then we went to Spain.
Got to be better there.
Portugal.
London, fish and chips.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So that is what that is. But we went to better restaurants while we were there. And the cruise ship we were on was a smaller ship.
Okay.
So all the food was better. It wasn't like this big carnival boat.
Oh, yeah.
Thousands of people. It was a 120 passenger ship.
Okay. So
I saw all the food was really good, but digestion was better.
Yeah.
Everything was better. From that, how I felt, brain fog, all those other things were better. But again, with some distance, there's no work every day. So
yeah.
I can't, when I first came back, I'm not processing that. It's like, holy shit, we're being poisoned for sure. Because as soon as I got back, and started eating normal food, trying not to, because at that point, this shit's all going organic.
Yeah.
Right? Because the shits were better. Everything was better across the board. And they don't have, all the bullshit that we have over there to the same degree.
Yeah.
Well, at least from what I was eating.
This is what we need to do. We need to set up a randomized blind control study where we get a chef and Dave does it. And then be like, and monitor his digestion and how you're feeling. And you won't even know. He'd be like, yeah, that would actually, that's the kind of stuff we need to do, because it would be hard to tease out.
Well, even like the small, and granted, I'm in one neighborhood, right? The small convenience stores in London were completely different than if you were to go to
different. Yeah.
Fresh food.
Yeah.
Like a whole aisle of fruits.
That's nice.
Vegetables and shit like that. Where the candy, like candy bars and shit was like half of a counter.
Yeah.
Then the other half of the counter were like protein bars.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm looking for a fucking Pepsi. I can't find a Pepsi anywhere.
Give me this
code, just things like that, kind of stuff.
It's like for me, when we come up, I'm from the UK originally. Like for us, like seeing like pizza hot served at a gas station is like, what?
Yeah, there's none of that.
Do you know what I mean? Like you wouldn't get that over there.
Yeah, it's a lot of biscuit cookie type things. Like say we got a whole row of fucking Oreos.
Yeah.
I don't even know what the damn things are called. They're just like tasteless fucking biscuits that are supposed to be cookies, but they're really not.
Yeah, you guys have mastered candy and biscuits and all that. That's all I'll say. You put us to shame on that.
Yeah.
It is, even in the UK, even though we're obviously very similar culturally, it is, I'd say like if you took like the average distance between every McDonald's on a highway or whatever, like it's considerably bigger in the UK, even though obviously it's considerably smaller. So I'd say it's a little less easier to reach for. It would be that's the only thing. It's all there. It's just rather than 5 minutes away, it might be 10 minutes away. And maybe that's enough.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like I'm sure with some of your clients, sometimes putting the biscuits or whatever on a high shelf where they can't reach is probably enough to make them. So, do you know what I mean? Sometimes the tiniest bit of inconvenience can really make big differences to behavior, but it's, I'm just curious as to what you think is why it's worse here.
Yeah. It's the environment. Again, I'd put the farm, I have patients drive different ways home because on the way home, they would always have to stop at McDonald's or wherever. And I'm like, okay, drive the other way home. And I'm a big into biology and biological drivers, but like habit cues of like, there's a McDonald's, this is my thing, I'm going to stop. And then you go a different way home and it's not there. It sounds so intuitive and kind of stupid, but it actually, that type of thing works. So imagine being in a country where that stuff's not available. You don't have any choice. It's just not there. So we're gonna go through our environments passively and just kind of consume passively, not even think about it. And even if we do think about it, it's really hard once you see that type of thing when your brain's like, no, you got to have that now. So if you imagine being in a place where it's not available, it's just not available.
Well, I mean, there's lifestyle factors too. We're probably more sedimentary.
Yeah.
Than because of my steps. I mean, that doubled. So it went from 7,000 to like 15 to 20,000 per day. Yeah. So that's another factor when you're talking digestion and all those other things that can play into that.
My wife and I, when we went to Paris, it was like 10 years ago, we laughed so hard because we got our meal and ate it. And there was another group there that was there before us, and they were there way after us because they were chatting. They weren't just sitting there gobbling their food. And my wife and I are lean, but we gobbled our food up and we sat there and looked, and like it was clearly a cultural difference of how fast people eat. They enjoy their company, they're talking. So we've tried to actually change that because let's try to enjoy each other's company instead of just focusing on eating how fast we can and getting out of the table. Although with kids, I will say with kids, like they're yelling and screaming, we're trying to just eat so we can tend to them. But when it's just us, so I think there's a cultural difference there with like how fast people eat and everything.
So with the obesity rate being what it is, whether it's plateaued, still climbing, whatever, we see a huge incidence of cyclical weight loss.
Yeah.
So we've got a scenario where the obesity rate's very high, gym memberships have doubled in the last 20 years, and we know people can lose weight.
Yeah.
Because we see cyclical weight loss. Obviously, the part of that is losing it in the first place, right? So why do you think people are trapped in that eternal cycle?
Yeah.
So like they've shown the ability to, like, you have to have the knowledge to lose it in the first place, but then we always fall back, which obviously is contributing to the overall scenario. So why do you think we're more trapped in that kind of eternal cycle there?
Yeah. So two major components. So the first one is that it goes back to the environmental thing. Like, there's only so long that you're in an office, and I call them Donut Dan. There's always somebody bringing in donuts to an office. There's pizza parties, donuts, cookies, whatever. And there's only so much that you can kind of white knuckle. And I mean, some people are able to turn it off, but most people, once they see it, and if it's available, it just throws them off. So that's one component. But the big component that goes along with that is our biology. We're driven for whatever reason, especially once we gain the weight. So the way that I kind of describe it is we go through life kind of passively, not really thinking about it. We just gain weight because we're eating the food in front of us, and the food in front of us is the whatever family and whatever we got in the habit of McDonald's. And it doesn't have to be fast food, but the processed crap that we're eating. Once we decide to make the decision to go like, all right, enough is enough. I want to lose that weight, which you're talking about right now. You kind of go in these cyclical weight loss, weight regain. Once you lose the weight, our bodies fight back. I don't know, it's an evolutionary thing. They fight back with increases in appetite, whether it's hunger, cravings, and people talk about this food noise of just thinking about food all the time. So when people lose that weight, they're like, I'm doing great. I know what to do. Those drivers of appetite signals in their brain start getting higher and higher and higher. And especially couple that with an environment that's got food that you want to eat that's around you. It's almost like you can't stop yourself. And people no, they just have to have self-discipline. And it's like when the biology signals are that strong and it's right in front of you, it's really hard to stop. And especially when it's all day thinking about that. So combine biology with our environment and boom, that's what you got.
You see, that's interesting because like in our neck of the woods, if you like, we take, say, a competitive bodybuilder does their 12-week competition prep, and let's say they started like 220, then they're on stage at 195 or whatever. They've lost 11-12% body weight. All of us would turn around and go, well, yeah, of course, after the show's over, their body's just ravenous, right? And they're gonna hoover up everything, and it's encouraged. It's like, go get your rebound. But like, it seems that and that's easy for us to grasp, right? But then in reality, that obese person is probably going through the same thing, because if they've gone from 350 to 310, well, they've lost 13% or, 12, whatever. That magnitude of change is just as big. Yes, they're still overweight.
Yep.
Maybe they're still technically obese, but the change from what their body believes is homeostasis is just as big. So they are basically just a competitive bodybuilder post-show, but they happen to be 30% body fat or whatever.
I love your intuition, because that's the way that I describe it when people have done bodybuilding competitions. I'm like, you know how you felt? Because I've done it before. I did it once. I don't know if I'll ever do it again, but it was 2014. I remember I got down to 2,200 calories was my prescribed allotment of food. And there's no way I was eating 2,200, because I was like, all right, I can just have a couple more strawberries. There's nothing here. And then all of a sudden the carton of strawberries was gone. And I was like, all right. So like, but that was me at 20. And we're having patients like allegedly eat like 1,500, 1,200, 1,500 calories. And they're supposed to do that, keep going, because they're not losing any weight at their higher body weight. There's no way they're eating that much. So the way that you describe it is, like you get hungry and the cravings start coming up. That's where that biological component, especially again, like if you're in a place that doesn't have that stuff around, okay, well, I guess I'll eat some more fish and broccoli or whatever the heck that they're serving that's not as processed. But if you're surrounded by the Cheetos, think about those. Those are another one. I think about the kettle just, but like Cheetos and Pringles, those things that are just crunchy, salty, and have a certain taste to them where it's really hard to stop. Those are around you and you just need something very quick. You start, boom, 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 boom. That's why you say they pop the top, you can't stop. Mm-hmm. It's like you guys designed us to make this. Like, it's true.
Yeah. So like in those scenarios, when we're talking like ghrelin, leptin, all that type of thing, the magnitude of change is more important than where you're at, would you say? Obviously, if you're at 6% body fat, that stuff is probably magnified because your body thinks it's going to die.
Yeah, right.
But, whether you've lost 10% and you're now at 30% body fat, or you've lost 10%, you're now at 10% body fat, it's going to be quite a similar scenario. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, there's a similarity there. There's a researcher, Kevin Hall. He's a mathematical guy, and he takes these big studies and shows that like there's a mathematical increase in how many calories people want to eat based on how much weight they lose. So whether you can compare it to the bodybuilders, I personally like it because I felt it myself. They would need to do a study and kind of see that, but like, yes, there's clearly a relative proportion there.
The main thing for me with the bodybuilder example is people's perception of that would be, well, of course he's going to do that.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Do whatever,
Exactly.
Whereas the guy who's lost 15% over here but is still obese, everyone's going to go, what's he doing that for? He's tiny on him.
Yeah.
But it's like, no, on the inside, his body's...
Oh, you got it. Yeah. Kind of this.
But we forget that the body always wants normal, and what that person's body thinks is normal is whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they've just dragged it away from there. And, they're still fighting the same battle. Just it looks a little bit different,
You got it. No, I think you hit it right there.
In your opinion, do you think over, in the US or maybe Western culture in general, we've gotten too PC, too soft with obesity, body dysmorphia and all that? So what I mean by this is, if you go to like mainland Europe, Eastern Europe, even a lot of Asia, if you're carrying a bit too much weight, your friends and your family will tell you.
Yeah.
And they're usually, especially in places like Russia and Japan, they'll be quite blunt. And we can all argue whether that does damage in the long term. But there is definitely a stigma there that exists that probably doesn't here and maybe out in the UK and other parts. Do you think overall that is contributing to it, as in like maybe the body positivity thing has gone a little bit too far, or do you think it's helped?
So the biggest problem I have with the body positivity movement, it's not everybody should kind of love their body for what it is, and it's easier said than done when you're, I always love the Instagrammers who are just gorgeous and just like ripped or like voluptuous and whatever. They look really good and they're like, love your body no matter what. I'm like, of course you do. You look amazing. What are you talking about? So I always have to preface it like, I'm lean relatively, and I'm good with my body, but like I could imagine somebody who's struggling with their weight not be as okay with it. But like kind of loving yourself regardless. So I think that's a positive thing. Where we start getting into trouble are the groups out there that are like, you can be healthy and have obesity. It's fine. Obesity, it's really not an issue for your health. It's more so the stigma that you get that's going to make your health bad. So when you look at some of these studies, stigma for whatever reason, and not for whatever, there are reasons for it, but stigma can actually cause harm to people. When people feel that stigma, there are things that happen to them that are harmful. What the biggest harm, though, is it makes people less likely to change their lifestyle. So when we were talking about the doctors who kind of go in and wag their finger, if that patient senses like this doctor has a bias against obesity, like clearly thinks I'm a less of a person, a lazy person, when I'm not, I'm a CEO or whatever. This person's very successful in life, but struggles from their weight. That actually makes patients or people in general, like I said, there's some that like appreciate the finger wagging, but in general, it'll actually make them less likely to improve their lifestyle. Now, is it a cultural thing here? Do other cultures, if we did studies on stigma and whatever the effects that are there, would it be different? I don't know, but I know here in the US when we do those studies, the people that feel the most stigma, and they can actually, what they call internalize those biases, they really start thinking of themselves as less of a person because they can't lose weight. So that harms them in the long run. So I think it's a false dichotomy to go like, we should improve stigma, and we should also focus on helping people improve their lifestyle for metabolic purposes to lose weight, which would improve their life, if that makes sense. Instead of going, nope, it's just stigma or it's just losing weight. We should try to help people lose weight regardless and not be stigmatizing, if that makes sense.
No, I get it. So like, in a similar way to how perhaps the view on mental health is improving over time, like
similar.
Previous generations, depression perhaps would have been looked at as just pull yourself together, you're weak-willed or whatever it might be. Now it's a scenario where it's okay, now we have medications. I have lifestyle things, funny enough, to help that. And it's yes, it's a problem. Yes, we don't want you to deal with it, but we want you to deal with it, I'm sorry. But also you need to feel that you can talk about it.
Yes.
And do you think we're just a couple of years away from that? Maybe it's just a little bit behind the curve in that regard?
Yeah, it's going to happen. It's slow, but it's starting to be taught more in med schools and residencies. I mean, they didn't really teach us about obesity in medical school or even residency. I was the one that was kind of teaching some of these of my teachers about it. But I do think there's going to be a period. It just takes a long time to make these big shifts in medicine. But I do think is it going to be in 5 years? Probably not. 10, 15, 20 years, I think we'll see a much bigger change.
Do you think the battle with obesity, though, is harder because there's more of an emotional attachment? So, like, for example, we take smoking, alcohol, whatever. It's easier to have those conversations where you can sit down and say, you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't drink, whatever it might be. But then once we get into eating and body image and so on, which obviously is all intrinsically linked, we start having that huge emotional attachment to those. Do you think that's where a lot of the battle is being made more difficult? The fact that you can't separate those two factors, right? The physical from the emotional.
It's tough because you can see obesity. Whereas like smoking, sure, skin changes and you can see someone smoke every once in a while or drinking, whatever. But like we are programmed to see someone that's struggling with their weight and I don't know if it's taught at a young age. You just our biases are that this person is lazy, this person doesn't care about their health, whereas you actually don't know anything about that person. They may be like working really hard to keep their weight off or trying to lose that weight. So but you can see it, and so we're already programmed to think of that person in a certain way. Whereas other diseases, think about like, I don't know, HIV or something where you can't see it necessarily. It's still stigmatized, but you can't actually see it. If someone walking down the street, you don't know if they have HIV or something like that. But obesity, you can. You don't know if somebody has an alcohol problem unless they're stumbling around down the street. But like obesity, like, yeah, you can see it. So there is absolutely that physical component. And the other thing is, like, when you look at like alcohol and smoking, we don't need to drink alcohol to survive. We don't need to smoke to survive, but you need to eat. So like that, it's hard to disentangle that. We need sustenance to survive.
So it's hard. Do you think it's then we're kind of suffering from a bit of an evolutionary hangover in that, you know, at the times where our subconscious developed, for a person to be obese, that would have been pretty difficult. You know what I'm saying? Like caveman time, whatever. They're either got some genetic disposition that is going to be a problem. Yeah. That means maybe you don't want to create an offspring with this person, or perhaps they're just stealing food from everyone else and they're an asshole. Either way, at the times where our subconscious developed, being obese was extremely rare and probably would have been indicative of like a red flag. Whereas now it's not really indicative of a red flag of anything, but we probably still have those same subconscious biases, you know, in the same way that like the human mind likes symmetry and things like that. So do you think that's maybe a part of it there, where like everyone just has that subconsciously ingrained and that's going to take time to wash out?
So when you look at it, comes back to our food environment, like cavemen, like they're just trying to survive. They're trying to get any, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not a paleontologist or what. I enjoy, my dad was actually really into that type of stuff. He was a biology teacher, and so we learned all about those types of things. But and I call my brother, he looks like a Neanderthal himself. But when you think about the food availability, like when the food's around and people have that genetic propensity, they're gonna get it, and they're gonna be wildly heavier than someone who doesn't have that propensity themselves. But back in the caveman days, they couldn't even get it. So even if they had that genetic propensity, they wouldn't have developed it because it just wasn't available. So yeah, there's certainly that genetic and evolutionary component to it. And of course, there's a lot of researchers, with thrifty genes and all these things about like, it's our evolution. We want to store our fat because we didn't know how much food we were going to get at the time, that type of stuff. So yeah.
I may show some ignorance here, but you may know better because, as I said when I came back, our history here is only 250 years. They got thousands of years of history. I feel bad because I really don't know our history here. But weren't there times throughout the Roman days and so forth where obesity was seen as wealth? And some of the kings were so obese they couldn't even leave the fucking top level of the castles because of all that. So haven't we been here before and come out of it? Because everybody wants to go back to cavemen. Yeah. But they're skipping a lot of shit that happened in between. And that would be one of them that I'm ignorant on. I'm just kind of throwing this out because I heard one of the kings couldn't leave the top of the fucking castle because he was too fat. Right.
That's interesting. I'd be interested to know who that would. But
I mean, they have artwork to be able to show.
I mean, even like Henry VIII and stuff like that, they were known to be not able to walk and stuff like that.
Interesting.
He'd have to be carried places on his throne and things like that. And I think it's in some of the Maori cultures, or maybe in Fiji, the male leader of the tribe is supposed to be the biggest, as in fat, muscle mass. Doesn't matter. You have to be the biggest, and it doesn't matter if it's detrimental to whatever you can do. Because it's meant to show that, like, my tribe can gather so much food that I, their leader, can be this size.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If it was in some of these times a display of wealth, or power, it no longer is.
No.
Which would mean we've been through this.
Yeah. The cheapest stuff is the most readily overeaten foods. Yeah. So like, I mean, so back, I always like the cartoons where they're feeding him grapes and whatever. Yes. I'm like, man, I kind of want that lifestyle. Yeah.
I want to touch on one thing before, because you've mentioned the genetic dispositions. I think that's a really interesting rabbit hole. But I remember seeing a study, and I think Lane Norton did quite a long video on it, where tracking people's weight gain over their life on average is like a pound or two a year or whatever once they hit a certain age. But most of that weight seems to go on in the holiday season. So like people seem to maintain their weight for like 10 to 11 months out of the year, put on that 1 or 2 pounds Thanksgiving through Christmas, whatever, and then not lose that.
Yeah. There's some truth to that. Yeah.
So I guess the question then becomes, do we cancel the holidays just to fight the obesity epidemic, or, how do we find, I guess the question then becomes, people are obviously quite good at maintaining because they're managing to do it for 10 to 11 months out of every year on average.
Yeah.
And then it's the holiday seasons and the social constructs that are creating it. So have we just created a rod for our own back, I suppose, in that scenario? But I guess the overall thing there is that intuitively we seem to know how to do this.
Yeah.
Just based on that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we did have holidays before there was an epidemic too. So that's why it's like, okay, so if you just kind of ramp everything up and you get we have an overall larger baseline of how much we're eating, and then an even higher baseline during think about Halloween's coming up. Kids come home with huge bags of candy. I hear it from patients all the time. They're like, the candy's all around me. And they said, that's when it starts. Then comes the holiday season, and it just keeps going from there. And then all of a sudden getting into the cyclical stuff, and you got the New Year's resolutions, which a lot of people, resolutions, they're not really, it's not as big of a deal anymore, but it used to be a big thing. Like, all right, now I'm going to finally go on my diet. Right now I'm off the diet until January 1st starts. So yeah, I mean, ideal situation is you moderate yourself during the holiday season. You keep those foods that we know aren't readily overeaten. I don't know why, but I would just stock up on turkey. I love turkey. And it's like, it tastes so good. Like, you overeat turkey. It's hard to overeat turkey. Like, how do you overeat turkey? That's what I usually do in the holiday. But you got your 10 different types of pies. You got the pecan, and you got the pumpkin, you got the apple pie, you got some blueberry, and you got all those different ones that Aunt Sue and whoever else is bringing in. So you got to try a little bit of each. You want some ice cream and some whipped cream on the side. Meanwhile, the other thing is they got the sweet potato casserole stuff that has marshmallows in it. That goes with your main course. So that's basically a dessert with it. Anyway, as I said, it's like, ideally we would find ways to not have all that stuff around, and you could celebrate. You want to be with friends. You do want to celebrate and indulge once in a while if you want, but it's really hard to do when our biology.
I think it just shows the power of social expectation.
Yeah.
You know, like I remember when I was a teenager, we had a really close family friend who was from Malta, which is a small island off Spain. And he took us around we went on holiday there, and he took us around to visit all his family there. And he has a big family. They're all Catholic. So there was a lot of them to visit. And in that culture, as similar it is in Italy and everywhere else, if someone comes to your house, you feed them.
Yeah.
And I think we did like 11 or 12 house visits in a day. And I have never eaten so much food in my life, because they're there stood over it. And if you don't eat it, rude. That's very rude. And like, man, I didn't want to eat for like a week.
What kind of food did they?
Oh, it was a lot of rabbit. I think like 7 or 8 hours. Yeah, rabbit is huge over there. They breed them to eat.
Is it good?
You don't have. It was actually.
Was it?
But what? That's chicken. It's quite gamey actually.
Okay.
But when you haven't got a lot of land,
yeah,
you need things to proliferate fast. Rabbits are kind of a good in that regard. But I could if you put those 11 plates of food in front of me, in any other circumstance, there is no way in hell I could eat them. And yet, with them looking over my shoulder, watching me there, down it went regardless, and it's amazing how much power that has over us. And then it becomes that positive cycle where everyone feels the pressure to have these events based around food. Well, Aunt Sue's bringing that, so I should bring some.
Yeah.
And so and then it just creates the whole scenario, right? So if we look at, because I think the individual disposition to obesity is really interesting. Because again, as you said, we just fall into this camp where you see someone is obese, and unless they've got some kind of thyroid condition or whatever, you just assume that they've done it to themselves. They're lazy, whatever, right? So what kind of individual factors are there from like a genetic standpoint that are going to determine how easy or hard these things are to avoid for an individual?
Yeah, when you look at the genetics of obesity, most of the most related genes are related to appetite in the central nervous system. So these people in general just have larger appetites instead of like, you always hear about the people that they can eat whatever they want no matter what, and they stay thin. A lot of those people just don't even eat as much as they think they do. They just eat a slice of pizza, and it's like, oh, this person eats whatever they want. They eat junk food and they stay lean. It's because they eat the piece and they're like, all right, I'm good. Whereas someone else who, like, let's say, someone that doesn't have a propensity necessarily, but they don't have those lean genetics, they might eat a couple pieces. But someone who has a higher propensity, they're going to have a higher appetite driver from their, and it's not all by, it's environmentally driven. There's a nurturing when you're younger. Just patients tell me their parents went through a nasty divorce, and the way that they were young, they comforted themselves or hear their parents yelling, they go and run and get snacks. It's really sad to hear some of these things. They call them like adverse childhood events where they coped with food. So some of that can develop early, and that can change some of the brain appetite centers of just early on in life. But like, let's say just all things being equal with genetics, it's appetite driven mostly. There's some other little differences, but the big things are appetite.
Sure. So like is that usually like leptin and ghrelin kind of related, or more systems beyond?
There's a lot more beyond that, but some of the most common there's polygenic obesity, and that's like multiple little genes, and there can be all sorts of different things that I don't even know the names of a lot of them. And then there's monogenic, where you can have one of these receptors. You can have leptin deficiency or leptin receptor issues, or even higher than that in the brain that leptin plays a role in is this melanocortin system. So yeah, like in that realm though. Yeah.
So in that scenario, they are literally hardwired to want to eat more.
Yeah.
That's
right.
There's no way around it.
Yeah. And now again, if you put them back in the caveman days, so this is what people say, like, why is it that it's not genetics? So there's a big 60 Minutes. The person said, see, it's genetics. And people are like, what? The lifestyle has nothing to do with it? No, I like the saying about how the genetics load the gun, the environment pulls the trigger. Because like there are people back in the caveman days that had those genetics that would have given them the propensity to have that obesity. And those people likely were heavier than their counterparts back then. It's just that the variance was so small. Like we'd see that person that was heavier back then and be like, they're lean. But like now that same person, fast forward them into this day and age, those are the people that you'd see walking down the street, be like, why is that person 400 pounds? But back then they were just a little bit heavier than their other caveman buddies. So yeah, they're hardwired to be that way, but it's exaggerated with our environments, if that makes sense.
So I've got a couple written down here that maybe you can have some input on. Opioid receptors and the pleasure response from sugar. So I found a study the other day that was showing that rats who were fed high glucose in frequent intervals had the same dopamine and opioid receptor downregulation and stimulation that you would expect to see from recreational drug use, for example. So, and I know that we have variation in that in the human population. So again, is that a factor, do you believe, in that to some person, that bag of Sour Patch Kids or whatever is just okay? And then to someone with those higher levels of receptors or more sensitive receptors, that bag of Sour Patch Kids is now not just okay, it's correct. It's godly.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, there's something to it. There's been some more research. They've been trying to look at, like, is there a drug-like effect to these foods? It's probably not the same effect as drugs. And the more recent study that just came out from Kevin Hall, I was talking about his group. They were looking at some of these dopamine responses, and they didn't see like drug-like effects, but that doesn't mean there's not a similar type of effect there. The way these patients describe it, when I ask them, like, why can't you change? Like, what does it seem like? They describe almost this like addictive like effect, and you can't call it an addiction. There's a whole criteria. It's really controversial over whether it's food addiction is similar to drug addiction. It's not this. It's not to the same level, but there's addictive like responses. And so, yes, there's what you just kind of described as like, yeah, to some person, I don't know, like I'll eat some Sour Patch Kids, but to some other person, it's like they can't stop.
True. And then if we're looking at like a neurological standpoint, some people are naturally more relaxed. Some people are naturally more anxious. For example, they have higher cortisol, adrenaline levels in their system naturally. Good way to bring down cortisol and adrenaline obviously is carbs, which is pretty much the best system there is for that. So then we even run into like people who are anxious are probably more likely to be grabbing for those Sour Patch Kids and stuff like that. Is that something that you see at all in the people that you see? Do you see like a a propensity for people using it as a coping mechanism for anxiety and things like that?
So this is what they describe. So with the new drugs that are these GLP-1 agonists, they talk about this food noise. It's not like hunger. It's not specific cravings. It's just thoughts about food. And when I use these medicines, when these people just feel like they can't change their lifestyle, so I use these medicines, it allows them to then do the lifestyle. What they describe the changes, they don't feel anxious anymore. They don't feel, because they were anxious because they like thought about food all the time. And their world revolved around food. And so then they'd use food to then make them not feel anxious. Whether they're anxious and then they use food to help with that, it's hard to say. But the food was definitely the central part of it. So these medicines come in and quiet that food noise, and they all of a sudden their anxiety goes down. So there's very likely some overlap there. Other people cope in different ways. Like if I'm feeling kind of anxious, going for a walk or something like that. But I will say those kettle chips, though, once in a while, when I'm stressed, I'm like, the kettle chips are just like, oh God, that felt good. So
this food noise that you've mentioned a few times now obviously seems quite prolific in the individuals who are struggling with this. So when with the way they describe this, is it usually for specific foods?
No.
It is just the like subconscious need to eat something.
It's a thought about food. So I've done these, I get a lot of patients and follower people together, and I ask them, like, describe it. Because I think you've done a bodybuilding competition.
No, I haven't gone. I'm not dedicated.
Yeah, I'm dedicated. So if you've lost, like, when I did the bodybuilding thing, when I got down to a certain weight, it was like, I was just, all I could think about was food. Anything and everything. Wasn't anything specific. Maybe I had some specific cravings once in a while. So I think it's probably similar to that. What they describe is like, I'm like, are you craving chips? What do you crave? No, it's not a specific food. And I'm like, are you hungry? They're like, nope, I'm full. I just ate, but I'm still thinking about when's my next meal. It could be it could be egg whites, chicken, whatever. It's just food in general. When am I going to eat? How much is it going to be? Am I going to get hungry? Like, waiting for that type of thing. That's how they describe it. It's really interesting. And it's something that likely, I mean, some people think that, yeah, when you restrict people too much, that's when this food noise develops. But there are a lot of people that didn't restrict themselves that much and still develop it, and they're struggling with their weight. They just can't lose the weight because when they try to, all they can think about is food. Then you give them this medicine and it like hits these receptors and it knocks out that feeling. Bizarre.
So do you have any kind of idea what the kind of underlying mechanism for that may be?
Yeah, I think it's biologically driven. Clearly, there's a psychological component that they might not be able to pin to biology, but these medicines hit receptors in parts of the brains that then have downstream effects to other parts of the brains. And I've never seen anything like it. Like, people are like, I don't feel like gambling anymore. I'm just like, you don't want to gamble anymore? It's not even just food. It's clearly hitting that reward center in such a way in the brain that it dampens down that pleasurable effect. Nail biting, obviously alcohol, that's the big one we see. People are like, you know what's really weird? I used to have to drink a bottle of wine a night, which wasn't going to be helpful for their weight either. But now they're like, I don't even have that craving I don't even feel like drinking that wine anymore. So clearly there's some things going on from a biological standpoint these medicines are dampening down.
So I'm going to use a term that's specifically to trigger you, but it's kind of something acting on the addiction center.
Yeah.
So whatever the addiction may be, it can probably help. And it just so happens that we've discovered that it's very useful for obesity.
Yeah, that's
the noise.
Yeah, so the way these drugs were used and discovered, generally for type 2 diabetes, but they did know even in preclinical studies, people, these animals were losing weight. But like, I think now with the widespread use of them, now that these scientists and, clinicians like myself, I wouldn't call myself a bench researcher like some of these guys, but I do research. But we notice these effects, these researchers then go, okay, let's start studying this effect. I think these drugs are going to be approved in the future for straight up like alcohol cessation, like and alcohol abuse and all sorts of stuff.
Well, I mean, let's talk about them. Cause
you got it on your pad. Let's go.
So you made, so this is going to go into the food noise, but because it's my favorite film ever, and anyone else who thinks differently is wrong, you made a great Matrix analogy about GLP-1s. Do you want to just explain that? Because that hit home for me quite well, if I had to explain to someone how these things work.
Yeah. So have you guys talked about GLP-1s on the podcast?
We have, probably not to the depth that you can perhaps go into.
Okay. So I'll just give my little quick primer. GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, natural hormone released in general from our intestines. There's other places it can come from, but in general, these cells in our intestines, after we eat, this GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, is released naturally. It is broken down within 1 to 2 minutes naturally within our body. The way it works is that it actually helps our pancreas in what they call a glucose-dependent manner, meaning that if you increase your GLP-1, your insulin won't go higher just by itself. You actually have to eat, and your glucose has to go high for it to trigger your pancreas to make more insulin. That helps lower your blood sugars. And the reason they found this out is back in like the 60s, they injected glucose into the veins, and then they compared that to people who ingested glucose, and they wanted to measure the insulin response. And I would think that if you injected the glucose straight into the veins, the insulin response would be more because it's getting right to the pancreas as opposed to going through your GI tract. And they found out that no, the insulin went higher when they drank the glucose. And so they called it this. At the time, they didn't know the exact hormones. They called it the incretin effect. Intestinal secretion of insulin was what it stood for. And then over the years, they figured out there were a couple different types of incretins. There's a GIP, and then there's the GLP, and there's a few other things. So fast forward to the 90s, they're like trying to figure out, like, okay, can we like make this a drug? And there's a lot of people that are like, nah, you won't be able to figure this out. Well, a really smart guy found that the Gila monster, these little lizards, their venom was 50% similar to human GLP-1. Now, if you inject a bunch of, why not just use a bunch of human GLP-1 and just put it into the body? Our bodies will break it down very quickly. It won't have much of an effect. But if you can find a way to get it high in our system without it being broken down, then maybe there would be an effect. So they figured this out with this Gila monster. That's the first one. It was called exenatide, approved in 2005 as this drug called Byetta, inject twice a day, and it helped with blood sugars, a little bit with weight. Researchers then found ways to modify the GLP-1. They tried to go down the path of the exenatide, but most of the newer GLP-1s are based off of human GLP-1, but they found ways for it doesn't get degraded by our body, this enzyme that we make. And so then you can get higher levels of this GLP-1 in our body, and it still helps with our blood sugars because it helps our pancreas make more insulin. But now they're seeing that it's hitting these receptors in our brain and helping people with appetites in ways that they just never thought possible without having side effects. And in fact, the joke that I have is like the worst side effect is that people reduce their risks of heart attacks. Of course, we can get into the side effects of the bad side effects, but that's my big pharma shill joke because I'm like, side effects include like decreases in stroke and heart attacks. So the science around it is just fascinating. What started off as like type 2 diabetes drug, they studied it quickly for obesity because they knew it had an effect on weight, and now they're studying it for all sorts of things. So quite extraordinary. That's my little primer.
You mentioned GIP.
Yeah.
GIP. So that is being added now, is it not, to the one? So what is the difference there, and what is that bringing to the table that GLP doesn't?
Yeah, that's actually our body's most prominent incretin. What happens though is that it was found that GLP-1 was the more effective one for having the effect on weight itself and with blood sugars. But when they added the GIP, so this tirzepatide specifically is the new one. That's the one people know as Zepbound or Mounjaro. Mounjaro is the brand for type 2 diabetes, and Zepbound for type 2 diabetes, Zepbound for obesity, Mounjaro for type 2 diabetes. And so this GIP, glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, another mouthful. And really, they're doing a lot of research on this because there's some studies showing what happens if we just give GIP itself. It has a little bit of a weight loss effect, but when they combined them in this one long peptide that hits both receptors. That one so far is tirzepatide is the most powerful one, but that has it has another incretin effect to help with blood sugars, but then also helps with appetite further for what GLP-1 by itself does. So semaglutide is the most powerful GLP-1 only drug. Soon they're going to be adding a glucagon component to all the mix. They call it so the tirzepatide, they call it a twin cretin, meaning like two incretins together, GIP, GLP. But in the future, there's retatrutide, if anybody's heard of that, retatrutide. That one's GLP-1, GIP, and glucagon, another hormone that's released from our pancreas. It actually helps raise blood sugars when our blood sugars get too low, but it actually has an effect on increasing energy expenditure and potentially insulin sensitivity and all sorts of things. And that one's just going to melt the fat off. I mean, these phase 2 trials, I have followers that tell me they're in the trials and they've had to like stop the drug because they were losing weight so quickly. So that the future of these things is just insane.
Yeah. And that glucagon seems to have had a pronounced benefit over tirzepatide. You said it's without.
So and there's some other drugs coming out that will be just the GLP-1 and glucagon only without the GIP component, lots of different things like that. It increases energy expenditure. There's that thermogenic effect. And then it specifically may help target the liver fat in our bodies. So, and it may have pronounced effects on our cholesterol and things like that to where the GLP-1 and GIP didn't. So adding that glucagon component. Now what they have to do though, everybody gets excited, like we're melting fat off our body. This is amazing. We're turning into skeletons basically now. They do have to confirm that, hey, people are having fewer heart attacks. We've been burned in the past where it's like, the fen-phen era is what really burned the whole medical community, where they combined phentermine and fenfluramine. Phentermine was the fine component there, but the fenfluramine component was causing valvulopathies, heart valve issues. So that's why they have to do these. They have to be careful when they do these phase 3 trials to make sure that they're safe. Because you can imagine, people love losing weight, but if they're having more strokes and something, and so that's what they need to do with this glucagon. So far, it seems like it should be positive, but you never know. You never know what could come out of these trials.
So you mentioned their insulin sensitivity and liver fat benefits potentially. So do you think the fact that these newer drugs are having benefits beyond calorie restriction is going to help undemonize them, for want of a better? Because right now, when it's just GLP, people are saying, well, you can calorie restrict yourself, right? And stop being lazy, whatever. Now, if you're adding into the mix things that have benefits that you can't just get from calorie restriction, do you think that's going to help bring people around to, no, actually, this drug does something that you can't just do with a bit of willpower and diet and exercise?
Yeah, so the way I describe it, I mean, it goes back to this goes back to the Matrix scene. I totally forgot. I got sidetracked describing what it is. But so in the Matrix scene, I talk about these GLP-1 agonists, the way that, like, when people say to just go on a calorie deficit, it's like, okay, yeah, I just got to eat fewer calories and, hopefully burn more, but maybe not, just at least start eating fewer calories. Everybody kind of knows how to do that. They've done all the different calorie restricting diet, whether it's keto, whether it's calorie counting or some variation of it, low fat, Mediterranean, whatever, paleo diet. Most of the patients have tried that in the past. And they know they shouldn't be eating that extra slice of pizza or even eating the pizza in general. They should be eating XYZ, but their body just kind of pushes them towards that. So the way I described it with the Matrix, when Neo was talking to Morpheus about, like, you mean like I'll be able to dodge bullets? And Morpheus says, no, when you are the one, you don't have to dodge the bullets. So when we go in a calorie deficit and we're trying to use behavior change, we're going through you go into the office and you got to stay away from Donut Dan and the donuts in there and the pizza and whatever. And if you see them, you have to find ways to kind of avoid it, just like you're avoiding those bullets. And with the GLP-1s, though, they make it to where you can look at those just like Neo's looking at the bullets, and he didn't have to avoid them. He just like puts his hands up and they just kind of stop. That propensity to try to have that pizza and donut or whatever the heck that they bring in there that you're like, I probably shouldn't eat this. You don't have that strong desire anymore. So it gives people back, I want to say, agency into people like, why You should be able to, like, it's just a choice. You should just not eat it. It's like, well, for that easy, like, everybody should be able to do it. Like, people don't want to carry this much weight, right? I don't know anybody that like loves having an excess amount of weight on them, except for maybe like a sumo wrestler or something that's trying to, or the guy that's the king of the village, what are you describing there? So there's already, I would say there's some agency, but not nearly as much agency as people believe. And there's people listening that's going, that's bullshit. This guy's a quack. But this is what these patients tell me. I can't, like, and when I give them the medicine, they all of a sudden go, there's a misconception. People think that, nope, they're just going to keep eating the donuts. You'll just eat fewer of them. That may happen at some degree, but like what I see is these patients go, oh, I know what to do. Now that I have a tool to do it, I can finally do it. And what they do is they go, all right, yeah, I normally I would have stopped at McDonald's. I would have done this XYZ, but no, I didn't feel like it. I got to go home and I cooked myself XYZ, or I got home and I was able to eat my leftovers from yesterday as opposed to stopping at fast food. So it gives them the agency. So what I try to do is going back to whether the glucagon will, help change people's perception of them. I try to take away the morality of eating excess calories in general, because what patients will say when I tell people, like, yeah, so these GLP-1s aren't really fat burners. They help you eat fewer calories. Patients get pissed. Not all of them, but some people are like, no way, it's affecting my hormones. I swear I was eating 1,200 calories before and I couldn't lose weight. Now I'm losing weight. And it's really hard to be like, that didn't happen, because to them, they felt they were putting in a ton of effort to eat what they thought was 1,200 calories. But there's not a chance in hell that they were 250 or 300 pounds eating 1,200 calories and not losing weight. It would be physically impossible, biologically impossible. They've done trials of this. They bring people into metabolic wards. It literally doesn't happen. They would lose weight rapidly at 1,200 calories. So what these medicines are doing, somehow they're decreasing that perceived amount of effort and actually helping people to do what they know to do, really, or what, at least if they don't know, they will after you give them some nudges.
So do you think maybe part of the problem is how they've been marketed then as kind of fat burners and stuff like that? Because to kind of revisit an analogy from earlier, like if we look at mental health, things like SSRIs now are kind of, people know that it's like they are the things that get you to a place where you can do the things you're meant to do to get better. And if GLP-1s were maybe marketed that same way, like, no, this is the thing that gets you in a position where you can start. Yeah. Do you think there would be less hatred towards them?
Yeah, I think we should, they should be honest when trying to talk about these drugs. Now, when the glucagon thing comes out and it starts melting fat off people, I mean, just that'll be a different story. But the haters will be like, look, see, it helps you just eat less. Why don't you just eat less in the first place? But to them, I would be like, look, they're clearly struggling because their body's wanting them to eat more, and these medicines are allowing them to eat less. Don't think of it as a morality, a choice thing. It was a biological driver. That's how I would state that.
Do you think part of the problem as well is probably that early on, when it was first made available, there was probably misuse and abuse of them? As in, they're designed for the type of demographic that perhaps you see, which is genuinely obese, probably chronically obese individuals who have problems, whether it's hormonally, neurologically, whatever. And instead, you've got the soccer mums using it to use 20 pounds for their wedding or, whatever it might be. Do you think that kind of fed into the whole negative spiral around it?
Yeah, that doesn't, and that's, that it's continuing now and probably worse than it's ever been online. And I usually say, like, look, like, these shouldn't be used for solely vanity purposes. And now when I say that, if somebody's struggling with obesity and their weight and they have metabolic problems, and the reason that they want to lose weight is for vanity purposes, they don't care about the metabolic stuff, it doesn't matter, because still the drug's still indicated in that person, if that makes sense. It doesn't matter their reason for wanting to lose that weight. But yes, the soccer mom or the vanity, like the Kardashians, I mean, the celebrities you see that are using these drugs and they've only need to lose 5 to 10 pounds, they're able to pay cash for these drugs, and they're getting it from their doctor. It hasn't been studied in this population. I do think that contributes to the stigma of the medicines. Yeah.
Sure. But is it not entirely possible, for example, that TRT is becoming pretty well accepted now? You know, we can see testosterone on a blood panel, which helps, right? You can see it is low. But, you know, a lot of these people that you're perhaps prescribing these drugs to, is it not entirely possible that they are lacking glucagon or GLP-1 hormone secretion, or maybe less receptors? Or, you know, there's something underlying that if we could test for it, we would say, well, look, this person needs GLP-1 because they don't make it, or they make it in sufficient amounts or whatever. And then all of a sudden people will be like, oh, yeah. So is it we just don't understand the individuals that are struggling, perhaps?
So this is one of those situations where obesity isn't caused by a GLP-1 deficiency. There may be some sensitivities and things like that, receptor issues. There may be a little bit there. But despite that, increasing someone getting into super physiologic doses of GLP-1 still helps them, even though they weren't deficient before. I think they're in the future, there's probably going to be some sort of scan or test that's going to tell us whether that person has dysregulated, dysfunctional appetite centers. That's what I think. I don't know if it's going to be a PET scan of some sort. Something in the future we're gonna know, more so than just them telling us. But it's not, when they do these studies, they don't see a difference in GLP-1, and it's not thought that people with obesity struggle from a GLP-1 deficiency. Those with type 2 diabetes actually start getting, and that's part of what contributes to their higher sugars. But those just with obesity, not type 2 diabetes issues, don't seem to have a deficiency. But I do think in the future we'll see some sort of test that go like, oh yeah, see, look, they're struggling. You can see it in the brain scan.
I don't follow it that close, but where is this backlash coming from?
It's a stigma of it's just a stigma of obesity, where it's like this person clearly lacks discipline to be able to do the lifestyle, whereas the medicines just come in and go like, wow, now this person can do it. Does that make sense?
In a way, but as I'm trying to figure out if, you know, the critic, because they're losing weight.
Yeah.
Right. Which would be what they've been telling them to do this whole time. So I'm a little confused, right?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to like process this as you guys are speaking, where I could kind of see like the fitness community feeling under threat.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to take my job because I help people do this. And now all they need is this medicine, so they don't need me. So fuck this.
Yeah.
You know, am I on par here?
So yeah, I love to make jokes where like, you need to lose weight. And then they're like, okay, let me take one of these medicines. No, not like that. That's kind of it's a holier than thou position. Like, I don't know. I'm not sure, because it's like it'd be, for example, I always bring up the like, well, we didn't have airplanes before, and would you rather like take the train or something all the way from New York to?
Well, I mean, on the other end of the hat, we're the most medicated country in the world.
Yeah.
You know, so I wonder how many people that are throwing the criticism out are on some medication themselves.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a statin or whatever it is, like, just shut up and maybe just eat better.
Yeah.
I mean, it can go right back at them, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's right.
I would understand it maybe if there was a public health system, like, you know, like in the UK, for example. This is an example of where hatred can develop. There was I think it was in the early 2000s, ladies discovered there was a bit of a loophole in the NHS where you could get a boob job or enhancement on the NHS if you claimed that you had depression due to how your body looked.
Wow.
And if it was related to your breast, then they started giving out breast enlargements to teenagers and young people in their young 20s for depression. And obviously, once someone finds a loophole.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see if you were like, well, my tax dollars are paying for someone to find a loophole in the system and get double D's or whatever. But that isn't what's happening here. People are using insurance or self-pay. So I don't really get it either, because, I mean, those same people that are throwing hate at you for GLP-1s, I bet they hate bariatric surgery more.
Yeah, that's had a lot of hate.
So what is the GLP-1 stopping them getting to the state of in a lot of scenarios? Or do you know what I mean? A lot of these people might be on their way to that.
I think I've seen over the past, like, it's been especially, so 2021 is when semaglutide came out. in 2014 or 2015, Saxenda, which is liraglutide, which is the older brother of semaglutide, that's been out for almost a decade, and that was approved for obesity weight, but it was not super effective. It was like 7 to 8% body weight, as opposed to semaglutide, which is about 15, and tirzepatide is more like 20, 25 almost. So we've come a long way. So nobody's really said it about that as much back then, but I think there's people are coming around to understanding this. I think because they're seeing other people do it, and the way their stories of what they hear. So I think, again, it comes back to how long are we going to have this stigma and this kind of paradigm shift to be more like mental health. We're saying 5 years. I'd say more like 10, 20 years, but like there's a wave coming.
Now, what would be the side effects and what happens when they go off?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. So the most common side effect is nausea by far. And for most people, it's mild to moderate, and it resolves over time. 95% of people are like, whatever. And some people don't feel it at all, but most people will feel a little bit of nausea. The next common side effect, and you do get I would say a small percentage of people get moderate to severe nausea, where you got to give them something to, like, otherwise they're going to go to hospital because they can't drink anything. You got to give them a little anti-nausea medicine. There are some ways of eating that can help do it. Big, large, heavy meals make people feel nauseous. They got to start eating lighter meals, which is obvious, but some people try to test their limits.
Is that related to like the gut passage slowing down, or is there something else?
So yeah, there's part of it is thought to be related to the gut slowing the gastric emptying, but there are receptors in the brain. It always goes back to the brain, where they even think that they're going to be to develop these things in ways that don't hit the receptors that cause the nausea in the brain. It's fascinating stuff. That, like, not only is it just a GLP-1, but the way the newer drugs, they hit the receptors in different ways that have different downstream effects. So it's not just like, all right, let's just see how high we can get their GLP-1 levels with this, artificial agonist. It's like, no, they change it in ways that it hits the receptor and has these downstream effects. So they're looking at ways to, like, reduce nausea from these GLP-1s, just how they hit the receptors. So that's the most common side effect, nausea. Next, I would say it's either going to be constipation or reflux. Constipation, obviously, if they're drinking a little bit less, slowing of their gastric emptying and their GI tract in general. But you can mostly overcome that with a lot more fiber, a lot of water, a lot of physical activity. Reflux, obviously, if you're not passing as much of that food down from your stomach down into your intestines, and it's kind of refluxing back up into your esophagus. We see that, especially with people with a history of that reflux, and that generally goes away over time. Other, like the diarrhea happens once in a while, very self-limited. Fatigue once in a while, and I thought this was from people eating fewer calories. I was like, well, maybe just people are eating less. But I had patients that weren't losing weight, and they're like, I'm not eating less, and then they weren't losing weight. So you're like, yeah, they're not eating less right now, and they got tired. So I think there's actually something about the drug once in a while that just makes people tired. Again, it goes away for most people over time. There's been a few patients where I'm like, it's not worth going through life being, like, miserably tired. So we had to change them from, like, semaglutide to tirzepatide, and sometimes you see some differences there. Fatigue is another one that we see. There's some other weird side effects but most common: nausea, constipation, a reflux, and then some diarrhea. Gallstones you can get. They thought that it was from maybe the GLP-1 is changing the way our gallbladder is moving, but they also help people lose weight, and people lose weight rapidly, you can form gallstones. It has to do with how the mixture of your bile. If you change the mixture of the composition of your bile, you can precipitate stones, and then those stones can get caught in the gallbladder duct and even can get into near the pancreas and cause pancreatitis. But so gallbladder attacks, gallstones is higher in those taking GLP-1s.
Is that a secondary effect of the weight loss? And
that's what I think. They think there's maybe there's an effect of GLP-1 on the gallbladder, but, like, the weight losses, we know people that lose weight rapidly are at a higher risk of gallstones. So, like, that's got to be a component of it. And then pancreatitis is, when they look at studies, big, huge meta-analysis, they pool all these randomized trials and compare it to placebo. There doesn't seem to be a difference between placebo and and the medicine in terms of pancreatitis, that was a concern before because these drugs work on the pancreas. But they don't see a difference. I've seen it a few times from gallstones though. So it can happen. You just want to make sure you're monitoring patients.
Are most of these things worked around, generally speaking, by titrating the dose? Because that's the usual protocol, right? Like you start on 1 or 2 milligrams or whatever, and then you scale up over time.
So I like monitoring weight loss. I try not to go over 1% of their body weight per week. And so if you're 300 pounds, losing 3 pounds a week, you're good. At the beginning, I'm sure you've talked about this, glycogen stores and water weight can fly off in the first couple of weeks. So it's really after that where we start monitoring closer that percent weight loss. Once you get over that 1% weight loss per week, you're at risk of losing more muscle. You're at risk of developing gallstones. So I try to keep it under. And if people are losing weight rapidly at a dose, I don't go up in the dose just to try to minimize those side effects. I'm trying to think of, there are people talking about like stomach paralysis and these like, oh my God, these things basically kill people. They're causing stomach paralysis. There's a kind of a generic colloquial layman's term for gastroparesis. Gastroparesis is where your stomach motility isn't working. Well, these drugs do decrease your stomach motility, your gastric emptying. So like it's not out of this realm that somebody may have a propensity for this gastroparesis. Maybe they have an autoimmune issue. Type 2 diabetes is a big risk factor for gastroparesis. I've never actually seen it. I've seen people have stomach motility issues, and then they come off the drug and it's fine. But there are these cases of litigation that some of these people allegedly have permanent gastroparesis. I've never seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's not been in the trials. Again, talking about thousands in these trials, whereas now millions of people are taking these. So not out of the realm that some of these rare things can occur. But
I mean, you spoke earlier about, the obesity situation in the US and how you need to get the glove and click your fingers probably to make it all go away.
Yeah.
Could these style of drugs be that solution in your opinion long term? Like, could they be prescribed on a population level almost at lower, obviously once the research has been done, etc. But considering you're now talking about benefits outside of weight loss also, like insulin sensitivity and fatty liver, maybe are we all going to be on these in 20 years, do you think?
Yeah. So this is where my big pharma show comes out. It's very possible. So imagine this scenario. Obviously those at highest risk are getting right now and trying to lose the most amount of weight. What if then we go, just like we were talking about with lowering our cholesterol and finding the people at highest risk? What if you're like teenager, 20 or whatever, and you're starting to gain weight? You don't have that obesity yet, but there are some tests that we have in the future that's like very predictive of this person's not only going to gain a lot more weight. You can look at, their socioeconomic status too and all sorts of other factors, but they're also going to they're at highest risk for developing those complications, heart attacks, whatever, strokes, type 2 diabetes, kidney disease, all these types of things. Imagine then going, let's give these people the drug. And right now you can't even get the drug. Like so many people can't even get them. The insurances aren't paying them. They're extremely expensive. But imagine 10 years from now where there's multiple companies throwing their hat into the ring. They're starting to become generic. They're much cheaper and just readily available. And when you talked about like non-weight loss benefits, I mean, one of the things is people have cardiovascular disease, not even type 2. Before they showed that people at type 2 diabetes that use these drugs have fewer heart attacks. Now they just showed that people that just have that obesity and a history of that cardiovascular disease have fewer heart attacks. So I could see a world in which I don't need to lose weight, but like if I'm on a low dose of this in the future, they found that if they study it, like you said, lower risks of heart attack. So it's very possible that if they're so abundant and so well studied and so powerful that we could all be on it, and then who cares what our environment is? That is such a big pharma shill argument, and it sounds terrible. People listen and go, "This guy is a shill." But if you open your mind to how are we going to battle obesity and can we go and just dismantle big food? I think we should try, but at the same time, maybe there's another way. And again, people are like, well, big food and big pharma, they're all in cahoots together. You can't even regulate big food, so then you need the big pharma, and they're all just making trillions and quadrillions of dollars. I'm just thinking, I just love the science of it, so it just thinking about that potential is actually quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to go full conspiracy theory, would it be stopped if it affects the addiction center of the brain and people stop buying nicotine pouches, stop smoking, stop drinking alcohol? They're going to stop it because then you're not doing those things.
Yeah.
Or maybe the profit margins from the GLP-1s maybe outweighs it. Who knows? But I'm sure that will come up at some point then. You know?
Yeah. It's just so fascinating thinking about, I don't know, because we've come a long way. We had these older drugs that hit receptors in the brain in ways that where our like appetites were better, but we're losing like 5-10% of our weight with those older drugs, and with side effects. The kind of adrenergic. People take those ECA stacks in the past, and you got phentermine and some of these other drugs that had similar adrenergic effects, and people lost weight. But now we're, instead of like 5-10% weight loss, we're hitting 15-20, and retatrutide is more like 30% weight loss, and there's going to be newer ones after that.
What's the window you're looking at when you're giving those numbers like 30%? What general time frame are you generally talking there?
Over the course of it's usually, so the newer studies are more like 72 weeks or a little bit more. So semaglutide, this what they call the STEP trials, when they looked at semaglutide, which is the Wegovy, the obesity dose, those were like 68 weeks. Tirzepatide in the SURMOUNT, they call it the SURMOUNT trials, when they're looking at tirzepatide for obesity, it was like 72 weeks. Some of them are longer. So that the one where I said, maybe up to 25%, they actually extended it, and people were losing even more weight over time with tirzepatide. So then retatrutide, I wonder how long. I mean, like, I have a feeling when you look at some of them, even at the 72 weeks, it doesn't look like they've hit. It might not have bottomed out yet. So we don't even know. I don't even know. We're just scratching the surface now. So, but yeah, and generally over like a little bit more than a year or so. And
that's impressive.
Is this like somebody, if they're deficient in testosterone, are going to have to be on this the rest of their life?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's the other question. Yeah. So the obesity people will say, if you stay on these drugs, you got to be on them, just like a blood pressure medicine. You stop the blood pressure medicine, and lifestyle is exactly everything else is the same. Your blood pressure goes back up, right? There'd be like a doctor, coming in, putting you on a blood pressure medicine. Your blood pressure goes from 140 over 90 down to like 110 over 70 or something like that. Over a course of months, your blood pressure looks normal. The blood pressure goes, you looks good. Let's stop the medicine, and your blood pressure goes back up. In general, on average, most people will start regaining their weight after they stop one of these medicines. Now, the nuance here is that when they look at those trials, though, there's actually a subset of population. They've done these trials where they re-randomize them they put everybody on the drug, and then partially wait through the trial, they re-randomize, or they randomize like half of them to a placebo, and keep the other half on the drug. The people on the drug keep losing weight, and then most of the people in the placebo regain their weight. But there's a subset of them that don't. They just keep their weight off. In fact, some may even lose more. So I would say that most people will likely need to stay on some, if they lost weight with it, they'll likely have to stay on some form of it. But there is a 10 to 20% of people that can probably come off of them. My guess is those people are more the people that don't have that biological component. So imagine someone who's kind of struggles their weight their whole life. The food noise, the hunger, and they've, even you could recognize even in their teenage years, they're a little bit heavier than their peers and their counterparts. What about someone else who is relatively lean their whole life, but something happened, a pandemic, a pandemic threw people off their life. So some people lost weight, but some people gained weight. People have a death in the family, a change in their job, marriage, job change. Those people, something about their habits and environment threw them off, and they start gaining weight. Those people take the medicine, they lose the weight, but they may not have that same biological driver. So when they come off the medicine, they don't have that excess like hunger that the other person does when they come off the medicine. So I that's my guess. Again, this needs to be studied.
Are they tracking lifestyle factors of all these people?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of studies. Big Pharma wants to solve this. Actually, who wants to solve it are these insurance companies, because these insurance companies don't want to pay for these expensive drugs. So
yeah, but aren't they going to save on the back end?
So yeah, they should. But the way the U.S. healthcare system is the insurance is tied to your job, And what happens is that, sure, this person's going to keep their job for a few years, but that insurance isn't going to be the one that's going to benefit. It's the next one that they get.
And yeah,
So this goes back to our system
yeah.
being terrible. Like I'm not saying we need to have an NHS or something like that. People hate it over there too. And it is all controversial. We don't want socialized whatever medicine. But I do think there needs to be something to where the insurances aren't tied. Like they need to be incentivized. You would think they'd be incentivized to figure out, all right, we don't want this person to have a heart attack in the future. The other thing is there's these middlemen called pharmacy benefit managers, these PBMs, and they negotiate the price. And it's all this crazy thing where the drug ends up being $1,200 here, whereas in other countries it's like you can get it for $100 or $200. So we need to figure that out, because if you can imagine bringing the drugs lower, then who cares? Like, what if we just pay cash for them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, screw the insurance.
Sure. So
that's
in those studies, and are we seeing significant lifestyle changes in those individuals who do regain the weight, or is that just not being tracked?
It's needs to be studied. I was a part of some of these things. So it would be interesting to look at what did those people do differently compared to the people that regain the weight. I mean, obviously they're eating more calories. We know that, but like, is it possible that those people, maybe it's not what I'm talking, maybe it's not the biological driver. I imagine that has to be, but what if there are some lifestyle things that they did differently, that they learned while on the drug, that now they came off and they didn't even know they came off. They're on a placebo. They think they're getting the drug, that they're doing differently. So I don't know those answers just yet.
I would be really interested to see what would happen if, in those 12-month studies, they were also given a workout regime or whatever, not necessarily a regime, but like encouraged to form an exercise habit, live a more active lifestyle. Then when you cut off the drug, do you see the same rebound?
Right.
Or when that happened, though, if they just lost 100 pounds, you would expect that they would be moving around more?
If they were my patient, they would be. I don't know what goes on out there.
Yeah.
You never know. But what people tell me is that, like, and I always say this, the drugs don't like.
Are you looking to boost recovery, enhance your sex drive, and improve performance in the gym? Do you think your hormones are out of whack and you're tired of getting the runaround from your doctor? Things like your hormones are just fine, stop lifting heavy weights, etc., etc., etc. I know what that feels like, as I've been down that road most of my life. This is why we've partnered with Merrick Health. Merrick Health is a premium telehealth platform that specializes in hormone optimization and preventative medicine, ensuring a better quality of life. Merrick Health offers a Table Talk panel tailored for our listeners, featuring comprehensive tests like total and free testosterone, sensitive estradiol, and advanced markers like lipoprotein A and IGF-1. These comprehensive panels of up to 84 carefully selected biomarkers allow you to identify areas of enhancement and maximize your physical, cognitive, and sexual performance. It's much different than the panels you may get from your doctor. Choose between self-service options where you can select lab panels based upon decades of experience, or opt for guided optimization with your own health coach. Start with a detailed breakdown of your labs and receive personalized treatment options, both over the counter and prescription. Visit merrickhealth.com/tabletalk and use the code TABLETALK to get 10% off your first order. Merrick Health isn't just about better health, it's about empowering you to take control of your well-being.
So we got the floor press bench. Now, I like this for two reasons. One, I work with a lot of fighters, so we work a lot in that anterior chain motion, right? So we're punching a lot. So our shoulders, our triceps are getting a lot of work. The main thing that we want to do is we want to put them in the best position to be successful. So with this, it allows us to still produce a lot of force from a given position that is conducive to the sport. So when you are doing jiu-jitsu or you're on the ground fighting, you don't have the ability to bring your elbows all the way back, right? You have to be strong in this plane of motion with this minimal amount of range. So this will help us drive more force into either the bar or to an opponent, and then also it keeps our bodies safe, right? Another thing with the bench is
they actually help people do the lifestyle that people know they should do. And that includes diet and exercise. And people are like, how does it make them exercise? I'm like, well, They have less pain in their joints. They feel fine when walking up a stairs, and they're like, oh, this kind of feels good. And they get into it a little bit. I still think they need that nudge to start, though.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's such a selection bias because I'm like, these are my patients. But I can imagine that out there in the world, these people that have tried to lose weight in the past, now they're like, oh, I lose weight, I feel good. Now maybe I should start exercising. That's my guess.
Do you ever, so we talked about the kind of the food noise post-diet and how do you get any kind of rebound to that effect when they come off the GLP-1? Like, obviously, let's say they've lost 20%, obviously huge change there. When they come off the drug, does their body behave like it's just lost 20% and it's screaming at them?
That's what the patients tell me. Now, it needs to be studied more. And my buddy, Kevin Hall, he does these mathematical models, and he'll be able to tell based on some of the regain of what happens there. But the patients are like, oh my God, the food noise is back. It's terrible. Now, is it worse than what it was before? I don't think so. Like, if I had to guess, it's probably similar to where if they didn't have the drug in the first place and lost the weight, they'd still have that similar amount of that food noise and hunger.
Or if you've been on it for a year, have you just forgotten what it was like?
Yeah,
to have it, perhaps. But again, another interesting study would be lose the 20% and then maintain on the drug for 2 or 3 months, whatever, and let body kind of settle at that weight range, then come off it. I wonder how the rebound would also look then, because these are all things that could easily be implemented to make all that rebound curve flatten, I would hope, at least. Anyway.
Well, they can't keep losing, right? Because they'll end up dead.
Yeah, so they eventually plateau. Like, that's at some point, everybody plateaus. So otherwise, it turned into a skeleton. It just wither away. No success. Yes, did it. Did it. So yeah, they eventually hit to a plateau. So what you're asking, like, if they instead of just coming off once they hit their NADE or their where they've lost all their weight, what if they maintain it for like a year or two? Are there adaptive changes that occur to where then their body gets used to it? And these are, I love those questions because I don't know the answer to them. I don't think anybody does yet. If I had to guess, I think there probably is something to that. You hear about people like, it was really hard at first, and now I figured out to maintain. But I don't know.
Because even if it's just an extra 3 months on the drug to maintain the healthy habit of going for a walk every day or playing tennis at the week, if it's 3 extra months of the drug helping you lose weight to keep, then that you've had that habit for 3 more months, and then you're probably more likely to keep it up.
Yeah.
Well, with the plateau, my question would be, what if they're starting at 500 pounds?
Yeah.
Right? The 20% of the 500 pounds, they still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
So they're plateau. So what's going to happen in that case?
Yeah, they would stay at so if they're 500 pounds, so 10% would be 50 pounds, 20% would be 100 pounds.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're still going to be, let's say 400 pounds. They would be at 400 pounds. Yeah.
So there's that whole other obstacle there.
Yeah.
Because that should be 200, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on the, but yes, that's where you start getting into the newer drugs that are going to be coming out, bariatric surgery. And just some patients like that, they'll start on the drug, get down, lose 100 pounds, get bariatric surgery, lose more, and then continue the drug. And then they'll lose way more than what they would have just using bariatric surgery by itself or with the drug itself. So more tools in the toolbox kind of things.
So it can be used to get them to a weight where they're qualified for the surgery and then used after to help keep it up, so on and so forth.
Yeah, very much.
I've got a whole section here on myths. So this is basically like just to trigger you for it as much as humanly possible.
Well, maybe it will create more memes.
Or that. Yeah. So first off, let's go with calories don't matter, only hormones do.
Yeah.
Which is great because otherwise GLP-1 wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where does this perception come from?
So this is where people don't understand, I would say people don't understand energy balance. So energy balance, the calories in, calories out. Very simplistic way of viewing it because there's multiple components within each thing because you also have to look at where you're actually storing the calories. It's not just like, all right, what if you're losing it from the muscle versus fat, or what if you're eating in a surplus and you're storing it more as muscle or storing it more as fat. So people get confused over whether it's just hormones or calories because it's both. The hormones can dictate how much you want to eat or how much you don't want to eat. They can dictate where you're storing the fat. So whenever anybody says that, I've made videos on it, it's like it's a fool's game, because no matter what, it does come down to calories, but the hormones can dictate how many calories you want to eat and where you store it. So that's what I use.
So it is that equation, but hormones change both sides of that equation.
That's right.
Because, like, you know, for me to bring up Naomi again, with her being hypothyroid, before she was diagnosed, she could eat 1,000 calories a day and not lose weight as a strong, muscular individual.
Yeah.
It is still calories in versus calories out.
Yeah.
But if you have to eat 800 calories a day to lose weight, that's really hard.
Yes.
You know, so like your ability to actually do that equation changes quite drastically then, right?
Yeah. So they're I always say they're intertwined. But when it comes to, at the end of the day, like you said, it's still energy balance, but the hormones can dictate that.
Okay. What about the idea that something that is organic or vegan is therefore inherently healthy?
Yeah, this comment I had this meme. It was one of my first viral memes back in like 2015. A patient came in and I was like, all right, let me try to help you lose weight. And they're like, well, I don't understand. I'm eating healthy. I eat everything organic. I'm like, well, like what? And they were describing like organic cookies and stuff like that. And I was like, what? But they were serious. And I was like, oh, people don't know this. They really think that organic just means it's got to be healthier. I mean, but you can get like, so the meme was, organic junk food is still junk food. And I compared Reese's peanut butter cups to Justin's organic peanut butter cups, which Justin's peanut butter cups are pretty good. And I'm like, look at the calories and everything there. What's funny is that it went viral because the calorie people are like, yeah, see, but then all the hormonal, like people are like, yeah, but those ingredients in Justin's are so much better. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Put them in a metabolic ward. They're going to have the same amount of weight gain or weight loss or whatever. So yeah, it doesn't matter if it's vegan, or plant-based or whatever, organic. It's really still the energy balance.
Okay. And the one that I always love is that regular soda is healthier than diet soda.
Oh, that's the worst. Yeah. This comes from like the Mark Hymans and some of these other folks out there that really fearmonger artificial sweeteners. And they've literally done these pretty good randomized controlled trials and showing that, yeah, replacing sugar sweetened beverages with artificial sweetened beverages leads to weight loss and metabolic improvement. They're like, oh, but there's an insulin release from the artificial sweet. It's like, no, and they've done meta-analysis. There's not any clinical difference in insulin release. People lose weight. Then people are like, why not just drink water? I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not just drink water? I like water, but some of my patients, they'll straight up say like, no, I'm not drinking water. I'm like, can you drink diet soda? Some people are like, heck no. But there are people when they're drinking 6 sodas a day, they'll switch them to diet. And they'll lose, 20 or more pounds or so and put their type 2 diabetes into remission type of thing. So when you look at it, just pure randomized trials, it's absolutely better to have the diet soda than the regular soda. You could argue about the water versus artificial sweeteners. However, some studies suggest that drinking artificial sweetened beverages actually lead to more weight loss than drinking water, which again, I wouldn't argue over somebody wanting to drink water. People are like, I can't believe you're promoting diet soda. I'm like, I'm not promoting diet soda. I'm just trying to take away the fear mongering around diet soda. Like, what, you don't have to drink water, diet soda. I don't care if you do or not. Drink water or whatever, sparkling water or whatever you want type of thing. But yeah, absolutely.
So that usually comes from the aspartame fear-mongering, right? But my question in that scenario is, what category, because it's usually cancer risk, right, which is the thing that gets pinned in with. What else, so whatever category of cancer risk aspartame falls into, what else is in there?
I believe it was, what is it, kimchi and other fermented vegetables. And it's something like that. It was in the I can't even remember. I did a whole podcast with a toxicologist on this because they went through the different cancer categories. Like there's definitely in humans this causes cancer. Then there's a probable, possible, and then this is possible in animals type of thing at super high doses. And you can see it. You can see other things in that category that we all use that we'd never say anything about type of thing. And I can't remember the specifics off to.
Because I mean, it's easy to pick your battle there, right? But then if you say there are 12 things in that category and you're fear mongering aspartame, but you're daily ingesting the other 11th.
Yeah. Alcohol.
don't really have a leg to stand on.
Alcohol's the big one. So, no, that one's a absolute carcinogen, and we have no problems drinking alcohol.
Because I remember when the World Health Organization did their big one on, it was like processed meats, which was terrible, and correlation versus causation. No. Anyway, I believe the category that they put processed meats in terms of cancer risk also included like mobile phones, Wi-Fi, sunlight.
Yes, I mean sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. Do you know what I mean? So like all the people all of a sudden were like, "Oh, bacon's going to kill you." I'm like, "Do you ever go outside? Is your Wi-Fi router on right now?" Like, it's so easy to plant your flag and pick your cherry pick, right? And that the nutrition world just seems to be full. Like the training world's not great, but the nutrition world is so full of this tribalism where people just get hunkered down on it's got to be aspartame or it's got to be paleo, it's got to be keto. And what do you think it is about food and nutrition that attracts that kind of tribalism mentality?
I don't know exactly. I don't know if it's because
being a zealot yourself, as you have
so you said zealot. We get really emotionally attached over things. We put ourselves in certain camps around it, like the plant-based kind of vegan folks versus the carnivores. I mean, that's starkly different. But for whatever reason, like, I feel like it's kind of like having your sports team or something like that. I'm not really sure. It's real people. I mean, you see the same thing around like vaccines and things that are kind of like unknown that we get very scared about. So I don't know what it is exactly. It's interesting though.
The plant we get just reminds me. I saw a video. I think it was last week. I can't remember his name. He's a very famous astrophysicist, and he was talking about the idea of veganism and vegetarian. He's like, just think for a second if there was like a plant-based alien life form that landed on Earth, right? Because we all look at like meat is murder, eating veg doesn't matter, whatever. But like, imagine a plant-based life form landed on Earth that was intelligent, and all of a sudden, most of the things that you eat are the plant's reproductive organs. So that's weird as hell to start with. Then the other thing you like to eat is their seeds, which is, basically their ejaculate. And he's like, this alien life form is going to go into a vegan restaurant and have a freaking like, this is the most disgusting thing. And it's just, he means it tongue in cheek, but it just shows the power of perception.
Yeah.
In that, okay, but we do kind of know that plants can feel pain now.
Yeah.
And how deep does that rabbit hole go where actually we find out actually they can probably feel it just as well as anything else? And
it's scary.
All of a sudden the whole vegan world's thrown upside down and whatever else. So the one that did come up on your page that I hadn't heard before as a fearmonger, which got me, was exercise is bad for you because it raises cortisol.
Yeah.
That was a new one on me.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
So where does
I've heard that one.
You heard that?
I've heard that one, yeah.
It's kind of a big, because this goes into, some of these, coaches, nutrition people, trainers or whatever, getting into that hormonal world of like cortisol bad and getting into hormones and oversimplifying it. And so I've seen these, and it's really in the menopause world, and menopause is such women going through that change. It's such a time where they're in pain. They're not feeling well. So they're an easy target to prey upon. It sounds terrible, but this is what these people, these kind of charlatan snake oil salesman type of people do. They find easy targets to prey on the pain that they're going through. And so what they'll do is they'll say that these folks are more susceptible to changes in their hormones, one of them being cortisol. And exercise can increase your cortisol, and therefore you should avoid it, especially high intensity exercise. It's like, okay, like that you're completely conflating a small little hormonal thing that we know of with a clinical thing that's just, you're just missing the whole boat here right now. So yeah, my brother and I did a whole podcast about the issue of cortisol and whether you should exercise. It's like, no, just exercise. Don't worry about what happens to your cortisol. It's just like, I saw somebody used to say not to exercise because they had a glucometer on, a continuous glucometer, and they saw their blood sugar spike after they did high intensity. So they said, no, just walk. Don't do high intensity exercise because your blood sugar spike. It's like, no, who cares about the blood sugar spike? The exercise was good for you. So they then completely over-focused on singular hormonal things that have no clinical meaning.
Well, what's the end goal there? Because no cortisol is basically
you die,
right?
You die. Yeah, you die.
What's the end goal here? Suppress it until you're nearly in a coma, and that's how you live the longest? Or
they don't know. They don't know. They'll just tell them they'll give them some diet, exercise plan, maybe sell them supplements that will try to reduce their cortisol, even though they didn't measure it or whatever. Yeah, terrible, terrible.
So another one was carbs cause obesity.
Yeah.
Which probably comes from the keto camp.
Yeah,
I would imagine. But why that? But this is a common one, even in people who have no exposure to this kind of tribalism and stuff, that inherently people seem to think, if I want to lose weight, I need to cut carbs.
Yeah.
So where does that it's almost subconscious to people now.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, Dave's been around a while, I bet, for the seeing these cycles of the diet, but even before Atkins, there was the Banting diet and all these other things. So there's Atkins in the 90s, and then it kind of went out of favor and then came back. Gary Taubes, 2007, the good calories, bad calories, kind of went back out of favor. And then now we're in the keto carnivore realm. And the smarter keto folks will acknowledge energy balance. But before, in the past, it was like insulin is an anabolic hormone. Even in medical school, you hear that insulin is what helps drive adipose deposition, adipose gain, adipogenesis. And so the thought was that, like, okay, so carbs are what are causing fat gain. We shouldn't be eating carbs because of the insulin. But when you look at metabolic reward studies and control for calories and going in and out, it just doesn't matter. So I think it goes back to the hormones versus calories thing. People think these hormones can override the energy balance, but it's really that the hormones more dictate the energy balance. But having said that, there are people that feel fuller and satiated eating fewer carbs, for sure. So people think that, like, the low carb actually helps us with the energy balance. But there are other people that feel better eating higher carbs. So it doesn't really, it's not a rule or anything like this.
I'm not sure how old this was, but I only saw recently a decent study, again, looking at satiation and things like that. And this was one that found that in this subset, at least, protein wasn't more inherently satiating than carbohydrates or fats.
Yeah.
Has always been a huge flag in the sand, like, you should eat high protein and then we'll argue over whether fats are bad or carbs are bad after the fact, right? But if that turns out to be true now, and protein really is just gram for gram the same as the other two, then it really just opens the floodgates to almost whatever you want to do, right? Which is terrible if you're a tribalist or whatever, but
the all-carb diet.
Yeah. I was about to say, as long as you're eating your minimum or whatever is required, right? But it's gonna, I think that would remove some of that bias if that starts to proliferate in that. All of a sudden it's like, well, even protein's not that special anymore, because that's the one that almost everyone agrees on, right?
Yeah, so the only difference would be, like, slight body composition, nutrient partitioning effects of the protein versus carbs and fat. But once there becomes a level to where it, like, you're going to have diminishing returns for all that type of stuff. So then you might as well eat something that you actually enjoy that's also satiating, that's not necessarily meat or whatever.
Sure. So you mentioned the Reese's peanut butter cups earlier, and I can't remember the brand. So I assume they're like fancy ones. Okay. So, and you said that there's no difference in consuming.
Very similar.
Right. So
very similar.
So in your opinion, because we had Bob Rakowski out recently, who we talked a long time about food additives and all the types of things, that the effects that they are having in the populations that you deal with, especially. Do you worry about food additives and all those types of things at all? Or is it and because that will get pushed at people a lot, right? Like, yes, you need to lose weight, but you can't eat X, Y, Z because it's got this in it or that in it. But is the net benefit of the weight loss always going to pretty much override all those things, in your opinion?
When you think about big rocks, like, if it's the analogy where you have a jar, you want to fill it up with whatever, you put those big rocks in first. Big rock is energy balance. I think there are what we call endocrine disruptors that are likely have an effect on where we store fat and probably our appetite centers. But the big rocks of losing weight are calories and satiety. So even if that means eating like some of this like Franken food of protein bars that are maybe more satiating than like whatever candy bar or whatever else like that. If that helps you eat fewer calories, go for it. And I don't care about the additives there as much. If you want the cherry on top, sure, try to, I try to cook with like more stainless steel. They used to have more of these Teflon pans, and I'm like, I'm scratching these things. I don't know what chemicals I'm leaching into my body, but that's like chemical, or that's like cherry on top type of stuff. For big rocks, it's still going to be energy balance.
Sure. So in your opinion, are any of those things having an effect on the obesity rate?
Yeah, I think there's an effect there. That kind of, some of these researchers, it becomes their thing. There's some truth to it. There's absolutely some truth to it, but that wouldn't be where I would start on the focus. I think that would be something, we should look into it, but I think it's more of these, the foods that are just readily overeaten and not necessarily the additives to them. Those still might nudge us into the weight gaining category, those additives, but like, I wouldn't focus on it.
So obviously, a big part of what you do outside of prescribing the GLPs and whatever is going to be some kind of behavioral change, lifestyle. So obviously in your field, you're going to be dealing with people that probably have a lot of very ingrained habits.
Yeah.
Like stuff that's maybe been around since the childhood, as you mentioned. So you mentioned making the guy drive the other way home.
Yeah.
What other kind of strategies do you have that are kind of go-tos with your clients when you're aiming to help them make these lifestyle changes and make better decisions?
Yeah, like low-hanging fruit, it's like, again, this big rock. So it's like we look at what they're eating. So like the easiest one is the regular soda.
Mm-hmm.
Switching to water or diet soda. Huge. That's just such the easiest, biggest, lowest-hanging fruit you can ever find. If they don't have any of that, then it's like, okay, you're going to Starbucks in the morning, or you're getting your Frappuccino. Easy thing. If they're willing to switch that for a protein shake with some coffee in it, that's a super easy low-hanging fruit. Then it's like, okay, what are you doing for lunch? Are you bringing your lunch to work, or are you eating out with clients every day, or coworkers? Eating out is just such another low-hanging fruit, to where like, how do we help them have convenient, easy to make meals? Most people aren't going to turn into gourmet chefs. I've tried to cook myself, but I'm far from a gourmet chef. So I try to make easy, good tasting meals at home. So I try to help my patients do the same thing. Once you have more control, like you can go to a restaurant and try to order broccoli and chicken and whatever, and you don't know that they're soaking that broccoli in whatever butter and oil or whatever else. And then you look at the calories on like the menu, which they don't always have, but you can sometimes find them. Like, how the hell did they fit 500 calories in this broccoli?
The Cheesecake Factory.
Yeah, that's the one.
My God.
Yeah,
you
that's
look
the one.
Off online and you're like,
I'm like, this doesn't even make sense.
Mm-hmm. I've been there. I'm this sad person, right? I've like had the plate in front of me and been like, I don't understand. Like, it's almost impressive. You want to ask, how is this?
Yeah, no, but that's exactly right. How do they fit that many calories into this food? It looks like it would be a healthy, but no. So not eating out and just trying to find some semblance of convenience that still tastes good. That's satiating too, obviously.
Sure.
It's again easier said than done, especially if you have like a family that you get the kids that I don't want to eat that, and you're like, shut up and eat that thing, and like, I'm trying to lose weight, and they're just yelling for they want their whatever. Macaroni and cheese, I don't know, whatever it is. That's what you're asking for.
I mean, I liked, I think it's Dan John writes in one of his books that like your willpower is like a tube of toothpaste every day. And like, once you squeeze it out, that's it.
That's it.
You know, like, so like, if you've got all that, like the kids have got their chocolate bars or whatever, and every time you walk past them, you're just squeezing out a little bit of that toothpaste.
That's right.
And once it's gone for the day, that's when you kind of snap.
Yeah.
You know, how much in your experience is success based around people diminishing their exposure, I guess, like giving themselves less bullets to dodge, to give you to go with the Matrix analogy.
No, that's exactly, it's huge. If somebody's going to be successful, they figure that out. I don't know if you know Ethan Suplee, the guy that was on Remember the Titans, the big guy that sang, and now he's jacked. I've become good friends with it. It's so interesting to hear how he's transformed, because he's had some weight cycling, and now he's lifting weights, and he's like, I'll never go back to the way that is. But the way he was before, but he's lost weight in the past and then regained it. And it's interesting to see folks like that in how they've changed, modified their lifestyle and their environment and how they kind of think about things. So and again, some people, they're biological drivers. I don't know what it is. That's why you'd sometimes throw in the medicine and give them that agency back, so they have almost like liquid or injectable willpower or whatever you want to call it, to where they don't have to even rely on that anymore.
Sure. But do you think, outside of the medicine helping them, do you think willpower is like an inherent thing, or do you think it's almost like a trainable skill where people become better?
Yeah.
Or do you think the people that we perceive maybe as having a lot of willpower actually just give themselves less scenarios where they have to use willpower?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I know. So it's a good question. I had this, I don't want to call it a friendly debate on Twitter, X for people who are a little bit more in the future. I call it, I'll always call it Twitter, about, like I said, obesity is not a disease of willpower deficiency. And what they were saying is that, like, yeah, but like, are you saying that willpower doesn't have anything to do? And I'm like, okay, go on. Let's see where this is going. Basically, are those who are leaner, do they have more willpower? I don't know how to, there's probably some differences in willpower and how the brain works, and that could be genetically related. The reason we don't like talking about that necessarily, because if you say somebody lacks willpower, it's kind of a moral thing, like that person's, it's like a sin almost type of thing. But I think, me personally, the way that I stay leaner, I can't have the food near me because I'll eat those chips. Another chip that I like is those hint of lime tortilla chips. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, my wife gets them once in a while, and they're just ridiculously good. And when I go, after I put the kids down at 9, I get down, look in the pantry, and if I see those, I'm like, I'm going to have a handful, and then it's another handful. And I got to add some salsa, and I got to add some cheese to it. So like when I don't have them there, I don't eat it. So I do think we're subject to it goes back to, like, if it's not in our environment, if those people maybe don't have more discipline or willpower, but they surround themselves in a way that they don't have to use their willpower. Does that make sense? That's what you're kind of asking. I think so. And I do it for myself. I mean,
because like my comeback to that would be, if it's an argument of willpower, would obese people not also be gambling addicts and alcoholics and cigarettes? Do you know, like, willpower is not defined solely in food. You don't have here's your allocation of willpower for food. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Willpower is a general thing that we don't really understand anyway. Yeah. So surely they would just be succumbing to everything.
Right. So that's where you see success, like people that are successful in other avenues of their life, like extremely successful, better business men, women than I am, better at whatever. But they still struggle with their food. So yeah, it's not, clearly it's different. Mm-hmm. And that's where I keep thinking is it's the biological drive to actually eat. But then it's not all that, because clearly there's some things when they're younger,
Well, the willpower debate's it's a weird one for me too, because how do you define it? Like, so we're going to debate about something that neither one of us can actually define or anchor. So we're debating about a floating topic that we don't know how to label.
The ability to say no to something you want now to achieve a greater goal that you want later.
Yeah.
Something around that. But it's, again, that's
in the friendly debate. I can't, I'd have to pull it up, but he actually said, look up the definition of willpower and tell me that. Just Google it. Have someone Google it, just like they usually do in these like podcast roundtables. Pull up that definition of willpower from Webster's right now. But when you look at the definition, you go, okay. The thing. I think the issue is that we tie it to morality. If somebody doesn't have this willpower, we think of them as not as good of a person or whatever.
Sure. But you think in those scenarios for, if you had a patient that said, I just don't have the willpower, would your argument be back that maybe you do? Yeah. You just need to stop putting yourself in a situation where you've got 100 bullets to dodge every day. I can't remember who said it, but someone was talking about how prisoners get jacked. someone goes to prison and comes out. Obviously, not everyone does that, but he said, or made the analogy of you get told what time to get up, what to wear, when to eat, what to eat. You have no willpower, no decisions. You don't use your willpower on anything, but you get 1 hour a day where you can go in the gym. And your ability to just thrash yourself in the gym is greater because you don't have to make yourself or use your willpower on anything else. I think that's a cool, little decision, polarized example. Yeah, decision. So, if Elon Musk has the same suit for every day of the week because it's one less decision, then maybe not having the kettle chips in the cupboard is actually the thing that makes the difference for you, for example.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's again pharma shill, but that's what the patients say when they take the medicine. They just don't have that angst, that anxiety about food, and now all of a sudden they feel like they can make that decision that is conducive to losing weight.
Sure. But do you think that's also why then obesity is probably worse here than in other places? Because I can say that, coming here, been here for nearly a year now, food advertising or just actual physical food is everywhere.
The bullets, they're everywhere.
They are literally,
I think so.
It's like going from maybe in the UK where someone's got a 9mm firing you, now you've got a submachine gun firing at you.
No, that's right.
Is it almost inevitable that people are going to break?
Yeah.
If that's the environment that you're in, do you think?
Yeah. No, I goes back to, I think our food environment here is just the worst compared to everywhere else. That's what I would bet the farm on it.
Cool. That was most of my topic, I think.
Did you have any topics you wanted to go over we didn't bring up?
No, you guys hit a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's good.
What would be the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, so Instagram, Dr. Nadolsky, it's at Dr. Nadolsky, DrNadolsky.
The memes are great.
The memes. Come for the memes. Stay
Come for, that works.
For the science.
Yeah, that works.
I'm on Twitter. TikTok, I'm there. I don't really do as much on TikTok right now, but and then you can listen Docs Who Lift podcast. We do try to do weekly, and we just talk about obesity and anything related to health and stuff like that.
Well, I want to thank you for coming down.
Yeah, thanks.
Great talking to you. Guys, we're done. All right, guys, thanks for watching the video to the end. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and click here, or here for more videos.